Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 51 of Through the Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. I'm Trevor Dame, and as always, right by my side, yet across the continent, Matt Feuerstein. Matt, we're finally in that exciting time for anyone that listens to the podcast. It's the final 5 shows of a year for Ring of Honor. This is just 4 more shows after this, and we are done 2004 Ring of Honor.
Boy, I wish it was that close to the end of 2020.
Well, it is only probably 4 more episodes of Through the Years away from the end of 2020.
Oh, snap. Yeah, I mean, 2004, there were things I did not like about 2004, but, oh boy, this year.
Yeah, I would like to go back to 2004 for a variety of reasons, I'll just say.
Yeah, some of the wrestling matches, for instance.
Yeah, those would be nice too. The wrestling is almost inconsequential to me, but yes, no, the wrestling was nice. But yeah, so I think something I should address right up front is none of you would know this. It was going to just be a surprise, like our guests usually are. But the good Dr. Keith Lipinski, was going to be on the show for the second time tonight. And unfortunately, he had some impromptu birthday plans. It's his birthday coming up. So happy birthday to Dr. Keith, I believe August 2nd. And so because of that, he could not do the show this weekend. And because our schedule, we usually can only record on weekends, and we didn't know if next weekend would be available. We decided to go it alone without Dr. Keith, but rest assured, I told Dr. Keith that we'd love to have him back still, and any show he wanted to do. And I think he mentioned in talking to me in private that the next Chicago show he attended, I think, was the Ring of Honor 3rd anniversary Night 3 show in Chicago.
Yeah, I think that's the very next Chicago show.
Yeah, so hopefully, obviously that's probably in Through the Years time. That's a long ways away, but hopefully we will be able to get him back on, schedule permitting. And
we've been going a little bit faster the past few months since the lockdown started.
Yeah, and well, Matt, truly the lockdown's going to end soon, and we'll be back to our old schedule, right?
Maybe in Canada.
No, actually, there's a giant outbreak. The biggest outbreak in the entire province of British Columbia is in my city. So,
how you feeling?
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm wearing my mask, doing my stuff. Going shopping at odd times to try and avoid people, being frightened of people my age, the usual stuff that you do in the COVID era. But so you're just stuck with Matt and I for this episode, but I think it should be a fun episode nonetheless.
Yes, happy birthday, Dr. Keith.
Yes, happy birthday. And again, sorry we couldn't make it work out, but again, hope you have a great birthday. And hopefully, at least now, this episode can be your birthday gift from us because we didn't buy you anything. Because honestly, one of the worst parts about being a guest on a podcast you like is that it's like you don't get to listen to that show for an extra episode, because at least I don't. Maybe some people do, but like I know if I ever have appeared on a podcast I like, for example, Matt, I hope you don't take offense to this, but your old great podcast, List 'em and Learn, I have never listened to the episodes I have done on that show. I was like, well, that's an episode I never have to listen to. So it's just a longer pause.
This is definitely a thing I know about you, Trevor. You're a humble guy.
Yeah,
you're not obsessed with the sound of your own voice, like some of us on this podcast are. That was a cell phone.
Oh yeah, you're so obsessed. But if you want to hear a lot of different voices, ones that I don't dislike, you could listen just to Matt's part of this show, but it would probably be hard to equalize that out. So instead, you could listen to a bunch of other great podcasts on the Pro Wrestling Only podcast network. Like, I usually plug a current show going on, but lately I've been kind of digging back into the older stuff. And so for anyone, if you just go to like SoundCloud, search on Google for SoundCloud Pro Wrestling Only, you'll get the SoundCloud feed of Pro Wrestling Only. And even though there are lots of great shows that we plug in the feed currently, there are so many like shows that have ended their runs that if you dig back and usually most of them have playlists on SoundCloud, so you can just get all the episodes in one place. Obviously, we've mentioned a lot Where the Big Boys Play, which is a great WCW retrospective podcast. But there was like Rich Wrestling Culture with Dylan Hills and Dylan Musgrave. There was, the old Titans of Wrestling show, Goodwill Wrestling, where he had guests on to cover different parts of old wrestling. Like, there was a lot of really good podcasts, like hours and hours and hours of stuff. So I always plug the new stuff. This time, how about, you can check out the older stuff. And of course, if you haven't listened to every episode of us, we have 50 other episodes other than this to listen to. So if you've not listened to them all, well, there's 50, I guess. That's my new catchphrase. There's 50. Me and Tony Yayo.
Even after the 70th episode, there's 50 episodes you can listen to.
There will always, from this point on, be 50 episodes you can listen to. There may be even more, but starting with the 51st episode, there will always be 50.
It's true.
So because there was this is the show we're covering tonight, Joe versus Punk 2 took place the very next night after ROH Gold. We have no news happened between the shows, so we can get right to the show.
This is like a show like we were like this is one of those shows where it's like when we started this podcast, it's like imagine when we get to that one. Like this is a big one. This is a big deal episode for us.
Yeah, it's definitely, I would say like going like, one day we'll have to cover the Feinstein scandal. Like I would say Final Battle 2004 where Joe loses the title, Joe versus Kabashi. And I would say this too, we're all in my head like, oh man, like literally like you said, like I was thinking 2 or 3 years ago, if the show keeps going, if we don't go insane, we'll get to this one day. And it's always weird when you finally get to something you've been thinking about like in just random thoughts for years. And like it's literally this is the night with us sweating with no air conditioning and persevering and perspiring just for you fans. We're doing it right now. Joe versus Punk 2 took place October 16th, 2004 at the Frontier Fieldhouse in Chicago Ridge, Illinois in front of a reported crowd of 750 fans. We open with CM Punk sitting in the ring alone pre-show before any of the fans have been allowed in the building. Punk says the last time he and Samoa Joe fought, the unstoppable monster Samoa Joe couldn't pin the immovable object CM Punk. Punk says tonight the difference is the match is in Punk's hometown of Chicago. Punk says he's gotten his ass beaten plenty of times in life. When he was in high school, it happened in the hallways, in the parking lot. But he says one time, a couple of kids came to his house when he was having dinner with his family, rang his doorbell, and they fought. Punk says that on that day, he didn't look pretty when it was over, but he won that day. And the difference with that day was that they came to his house. Punk says Chicago was where he was born, where he was trained, where he was raised, and probably where he's going to die. He then goes on to say, he mentioned that his best friend Chez is going to be in attendance in the crowd on this night. Then Punk says Ring of Honor has 2 legends in attendance as well tonight, Mick Foley and a guy who's gone 60 minutes in the past, Ricky Steamboat. Punk says if you don't think he's going to capitalize on all of these points tonight, you don't know him. Punk says Joe rang his doorbell and he dares him to try and pin or submit him in his hometown. Matt, before I just ask you what you think about the promo, do you really think somebody rang CM Punk's doorbell when he was young while he was having dinner and started a fight there? That would be a pretty brazen bully to come to your house and be like, let's start something right now.
Is Phil home? I want to fight him.
Phil, honey, it's that bully. Been beating you up a lot. You can stop eating the mashed potatoes.
Well, I can definitely tell you that if there was somebody who was able to beat me up in school, they were also able to beat me up at my house. I promise.
So it was a good promo, I thought, actually. Even if it was like it felt like it was him doing a bit. Like, for all I know, that CM Punk story is true, and a bully really did come to his house, but it felt kind of like it was just a forced way of him emphasizing that he has the hometown advantage tonight. But it was still a good promo, I thought.
Well, I thought this was a unique situation because how often do we have ROH DVDs that start with like a promo hyping the main event from one of the main eventers? Like, you'd think that would be a very common thing in ROH DVDs, but it's really not. Right? Like, and I've actually had this critique before that they didn't have promos for the Danielson Joe match. Like, it's just, I'm pretty sure they did have promos for the first Punk Joe match, but a lot of times they just don't do the promos. And I think that they're important, and I think that this immediately made the match feel more important. It was also a different type of Punk promo than we're used to. It wasn't as dynamic. It was like earnest. You know what I mean? He even did a little bit of John Mellencamp, right? I was born in Chicago. All my friends live here. I'm probably going to die here someday. Only difference is Chicago's not a small town. But yeah, no, I thought like, it's not like it was an amazing promo, but the existence of the promo I think was very, very good and helped the presentation a lot.
Yeah, it set the stakes for the night, and that's a good point that Ring of Honor usually doesn't do promos like this. And kind of going further in that direction, we'll get to it at the end of the show, but the two promos that end the show are actually both wrestlers in after the main event, right after, like talking about what just happened and kind of selling the idea of a rematch or not wanting a rematch, which again gave the show a different feel because usually you know the end of the show, it's a kind of a grab bag of promos, whatever is whatever hanging threads they're wanting to push for next time. It's not always. Sometimes it can be a promo from the main eventers, but this time that's literally the only thing after the main event is just a promo from each guy in the main event. It almost felt more like an MMA post-show kind of thing. Like, you just fought. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? All right, that's the end. And I thought it was actually a cool vibe for this night.
For a long time, they started and ended shows with like sort of like the lower card guys, right? A lot of Special K stuff, starting and ending the show, Ring Crew Express stuff, people being yelled at on buses, that sort of thing. This is like, yeah, much more solid wrestling presentation. I really appreciated it.
Yeah. Cut to somewhere else in the building, and we see Alex Shelley, Roderick Strong, and Jack Evans. Shelley says that because of Ricky Steamboat, Generation Next looked like complete retards, that's his words, the night before in their loss to the Second City Saints. Shelley says they'll take care of Ricky Steamboat at another time. He goes on to say that Austin Aries isn't here tonight because he took the Pepsi plunge the night before, but tonight Generation Next can afford to be down a man because Chicago is their city, so I guess they didn't see that CM Punk promo. He goes, last time they were there, they made an impact by beating down Steamboat, the Second City Saints, and Jimmy Jacobs. So at this point, Shelley turns his attention to Jacobs. He says Jimmy's like a little gnat that he can't get rid of. But he says after tonight, he promises Jacobs will never want another match with him. Shelley also hypes that tonight will be the first ever clash between Generation Next and the Rottweilers, the two big stables in Ring of Honor at this point, I guess other than the Second City Saints. And he guarantees that tonight they'll declare their dominance over them. Jack Evans breakdances. He says that the Rottweilers ain't hood. They're going to get served. And you know this, man. And so, yeah, this was a promo. I mean, it accomplished, this is just a promo, basically. It's not great. It's not bad. It just tells you what's coming up.
Did you notice how visual Shelley was being, though? Like, he inserted a lot of visuals into the promo. Like, when he talked about the Steamboat chop, he pantomimed a chop. Then when he talked about the Pepsi plunge, he pantomimed the Pepsi plunge position. Then when we talked about the Second City Saints, he did the CM Punk X symbol. Then when he called Jimmy Jacobs a pest he can't get rid of, he was like swatting at the air. Then when he talked about the collision course between the Rottweilers and Generation Next, he showed like two fists coming together. And then Evans got even more visual at the end by breakdancing. And by the way, Jack Evans saying the Rottweilers ain't hood, problematic.
I mean, I think it was. I thought it was funny because, I'd like to hope that was Chuck.
Yeah, he's a heel. I get it, but
that he's white. He thinks he's hood. He thinks he's street. He's trying to appropriate that culture, but he's also just the skinny, fair-skinned guy who is the opposite of hood. But yeah, I didn't notice that about Alex Shelley. It'd be interesting to see someone try and do a promo just with hand signals. I think that would be good.
American Sign Language. I bet you it's been done on some indie.
Probably. If anyone, email us at throughtheyears@gmail.com, THROH, if you have an example of a promo done just in American Sign Language. And that brings us to the opener, kind of a historic match in a weird way and kind of not in a more obvious way, because Davey Andrews and TJ Dalton went to a no contest in 10 seconds when the Carnage Crew ran in and beat both guys down almost immediately. So noteworthy in that this was the first time in Ring of Honor history that a graduate of the Ring of Honor school ever wrestled on the main card of a Ring of Honor show. Obviously, it was not basically wrestling in parentheses, only in a technical sense.
Yeah, but he'll wrestle later, though.
Yes, he will. And like we mentioned on the last show, Davey Andrews was considered to be the star student of CM Punk's first class at the Ring of Honor Wrestling School. He kind of just disappeared off the face of the earth about a year in. I believe TJ Dalton, I don't think was a member of the Ring of Honor Wrestling School. I think he was a student of Les Thatcher, which makes sense because, Les Thatcher was doing a lot of stuff in the Dayton, Midwest area, in the Dayton area. He would often be involved with the Dayton area shows. They were just there the night before. So it makes sense. And yeah, like Matt said, we would see both of these guys later. Anyway, Carnage Crew run in, beat them down. Loke grabs the mic and says the Carnage Crew has come to Chicago with a mission in mind. Loke says Mick Foley is calling ROH Ring of Hardcore, and everyone knows there'd be no hardcore in Ring of Honor without the Carnage Crew. DeVito says they're going to show Moff and Whitmer what the hardcore is all about. There was a fair bit of Carnage Crew on the show. I don't know why you really needed this opening segment. Like, it wasn't terrible. It was very short, but
well, were the Carnage Crew on any of the other Chicago shows? I don't seem to remember them being on them. Maybe they were on the first one, actually, now that I think about it. I was going to say this could have just made up for them not being on the last Chicago show.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but knowing that they're going to get to run into a second match later and get a match of their own, they were going to get a fair amount of time and things to do on this show, but there's another thing opening. But then for our first outright actual match that gets some time, that leaves us with Jay Lethal defeating Delirious via pinfall in 8 minutes, 19 seconds after hitting the Dragon Suplex. So Jay Lethal's little, his early push continues. I think, Matt, we talked recently about how we were a little surprised he lost to Chad Collier and how he got dominated in his loss to Alex Shelley on a recent show. This is one of the, I would say, the early Jay Lethal matches where not only does he win, but he doesn't take out the lion's share of the punishment in this match. This is far more even, at least I would say, for Jay Lethal.
Yeah, I wrote, finally a match Jay can win, I hope.
Yeah.
Gabe mentions that he was on a losing streak, although technically it was really only a losing streak of, 2 matches at this point, because he did beat Matt Stryker at Glory by Honor. But I don't really have anything particularly negative to say about the match. It's pretty good, fast-paced opener considering the two guys, experience level and stuff and their status on the card. They were working hard. I thought this was the first time I thought Delirious looked good in ROH. I didn't think he looked great the night before. And I thought he and Lethal did a solid opener style match. There was some stuff that was a little bit awkward, like Delirious does a reverse Rana into the ring from the apron, which I guess was meant to force Lethal into the ropes and knock him to the floor. I don't know. I guess it wasn't botched. It just looked weird to me. The crowd was way into Delirious. They were cheering him over Lethal, which I was surprised by, but I guess it's sort of a regional thing. But Lethal ended up winning with a Dragon Suplex. I didn't think there were any major memorable spots or anything, and this wasn't a dominant win for Lethal, but it was a win, and I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, I thought this match was just average, but part of that was because it was short. But I agree with you that Delirious, this was probably the first performance where he actually got more of a chance to show what he can do, and he actually did. Like you, I was surprised that he actually appeared to be more over than Jay Lethal, who was more established. I think maybe part of that is because I think Delirious got to do the cooler offense in this match. He did a big forward flip dive to the floor, which actually Jay Lethal prevented him from doing it at first before he got to do it a little bit later, and actually got the crowd to boo because even though Jay Lethal's a face, that's kind of the heel move where you're denying even though technically it makes perfect sense for a wrestler to not want to get hit with a move. Fans are going to boo when someone's going to do something really cool and then it's teased and you stop it. I also thought another really cool moment in the match that really, the fans liked as well was Lethal was going for a big diving headbutt off the top, and Delirious catches it in midair with an ace crusher, which is always a cool counter. And then he hits, maybe not for the first time, but one of the early instances in Ring of Honor of Shadows Over Hell. He might have hit in one of his other matches, which is the big splash to the back of a guy that's kind of on his feet, just leaning over. And it's always interesting in Ring of Honor where we're gonna praise, I think, the commentary later. But one thing Ring of Honor was pretty bad at, especially for taped shows where they were, commentary for shows that they had already performed. I think one thing that's kind of egregious that I've noticed multiple times is they never know, like, background on new wrestlers. Like, we've talked about Jimmy Rave, how Gabe kept calling Jimmy Rave's running knee the Shining Wizard, even when after Punk corrected him one time. And it seems like a lot of times when new wrestlers come in, it takes them doing their finisher like 2 or 3 times before Gabe knows what it is. Like, you would think that
you could write it down. Like,
yeah, you could ask the wrestler when he does the show, hey, when I do commentary for this in a week, like, could you tell me what the name of your finisher is? You know, give me a little background. And instead, it's always just like they don't even call it. He hits his finisher here, Shadows Over Hell, and not only do they not name it, they don't really call attention to it as anything special. You know, where if they did that probably 6 months from now, they would know Delirious will be more established, and they'll be like, oh, that's Shadows Over Hell. That's a big near fall, but they just don't do it. And it feels like with a lot of guys breaking into Ring of Honor at this time. Yeah, they just didn't do the research where I feel like some announcers in different companies would be like, when a new guy's in the locker room before their match, I'm going to be like, hey, what are your big moves? Give me a little background so I have some information prepared. Ring of Honor generally did not do that at this point. Match was fine. My one problem with it, other than obviously it wasn't that long, so not much to judge on, I felt like when the end was a little abrupt, and this is where Jay Lethal is kind of on the ropes for the first time in the match, and he just out of nowhere hits the Dragon Suplex and it's over. Sometimes abrupt endings like that can be fun. Sometimes it just feels
abrupt.
I don't know. Yeah, and not in a good way.
But yeah, I didn't mind it because it got over the finisher, but I thought this match was a opener and it was good on that level.
And before we move on to the next, one other thing, Matt, is this is yet another show. I was saying this the other day to somebody. It feels like almost every Ring of Honor show in 2004, there's been a camera problem, but the camera problem always changes. Like either the glare is too much, or there was that show where it was near darkness in some of the backstage segments, or like tonight and some other nights, the white balance was completely off. So like the color tone between the ringside handheld camera and the hard cam just completely different. And you get used to it watching, but it just feels like it's one of those problems we've seen multiple times. That
this is still on the upper tier of ROH cameras, in terms of like the way the show looks. It's still like among the better ones, which is not a huge praise, but it's true.
Yeah, that's sad. Yeah, but you're absolutely right. We go backstage next to Samoa Joe, another promo hyping up tonight's match. Joe says in 60 minutes the last time they wrestled, CM Punk only proved one thing, that he couldn't beat Samoa Joe. Joe says Punk thinks he has the advantage, that he has Joe's number, but he forgets that in 60 minutes he failed. And Joe says tonight he'll fail again. So most of Joe's promos, it's good, but it's very short.
He calls him Punker, which is very cute to me.
Didn't they, I know some people would call Terry Funk the Funker, but wasn't there even some indie show or ECW show be like the Night of the Funker? Do you think Ring of Honor should have ever done a show called the Night of the Punker?
Eventually, if Punk had stuck around, it would have happened.
These are the hard-hitting questions this podcast dares to ask. Anyway, up next is this was a show with a lot of weirdly, things that were historical but weren't really, but are if you're Ring of Honor nerds, because next
one of the more memorable things on the show, I would say.
Yeah. We had another notable match in that it was Tracy Brooks defeated Daisy Hayes via pinfall in 3 minutes, 42 seconds after she hits a lariat. So this was the first time in Ring of Honor that two women had wrestled each other on a Ring of Honor main card in over a year. The last time we had a match like that, a woman versus woman match in a Ring of Honor on a main card before this, was Alexis Lurie versus Becky Bayless at Bitter Friends Stiffer Enemies in August of 2003. Now, between that match and this match, there had been some intergender wrestling where you had Hijinks from Special K wrestled Alexis Lurie on a match. April Hunter teamed with Slick Wagner Brown in a couple of tags against two other men. And then they had a couple women's matches on Do or Die pre-shows. So it felt kind of, looking at the cards, it felt like anytime they did a pre-show, they would book another woman just so Alice in Danger could have a match, but they never put them on the main cards. But so this is notable in that it's the first women versus woman match we've seen in over a year. And I wrote in my notes, Matt, it's kind of horrifying that I can call what takes place here both a step up, no, not both, but just a step up in some ways for the treatment of women in Ring of Honor. Because, I mean, it's a step up in that there's actually a women's match on the main card. But as I'm sure you'll also talk about, the commentary in this, it's like every complaint we've ever made about the treatment of women in Ring of Honor minus man-on-woman violence, all put together in the commentary, because they're doing like the patronizing thing where they're overselling how good this match is. They're doing the back patting where they're like, this isn't the diva search, even though their treatment of women at this point was hardly any better, than in some ways maybe worse than WWE's treatment of women at this point. They're talking about, at one point they're saying like, these women want to fight to get women's wrestling back on Ring of Honor. Like, they're acting like the weight of having women's wrestling on Ring of Honor is all on their shoulders and on this match tonight, which if you did this about like any minority at all that wasn't women, I feel like people would be a lot more offended by the idea, like, these two African Americans are fighting to ensure the future of them of this race on Ring of Honor. But yet for women, they had no problem being like, these women are trying to earn women's wrestling in Ring of Honor. And you just go, ugh. And the match itself, it's weird. It's not a good match in my opinion. They don't outright botch anything. A lot of the work looks kind of sloppy, but it's kind of a smartly worked match in the sense that a lot of it's just grappling and long chains of reversal. So it's not them trying a lot of spots where you could probably botch it more easily. Daisy Hayes does hit a really nice missile drop kick from the top rope. That's probably the coolest spot in the match. My one problem with this match, other than just the sloppiness and how it's so short and the commentary, so I guess actually one of my many problems would be actually just like the Jay Lethal match we just covered, an abrupt ending. This one I thought was even more egregious, where they actually did a kind of a good job of Daisy Hayes kept going for a stunner, and they kept doing these chains of counters and reversals with Tracy Brooks avoiding it. And then finally Daisy Hayes hits it. So you go, wow, they built to that move actually as much as you could in a match that's under 4 minutes. And then Tracy Brooks immediately no-sells it, gets up, hits a lariat, and wins. And it was just like right after the last match, I was just like, same finish, even worse again. But Matt, I'm sure you have more to say about the commentary and stuff, because this was just another landmark moment for the treatment of women in Ring of Honor.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the match was like as good as you would reasonably expect, given that it's Daisy Hayes and Tracy Brooks and they have 3 minutes, like it's just like they did fine, I guess. I really have no strong complaints about the match. Like, it wasn't a good match, but it couldn't have been, Does that make sense? Like, there was no chance for it to be, given the time and the skill level of at least one of the participants. I mean, although Tracy Brooks hit a couple of decent, like her gut wrench suplex, I thought was pretty good. But it's not like these were like the top wrestlers in the country among women. You know what I mean? Like,
although I actually do think Daisy Hayes is a good wrestler. I've seen a bunch of her work at Chikara and even Ring of Honor. I think she will go on to have better performances than this. And like you just said, she did not. Neither of these women. You don't get much of an opportunity getting under 4 minutes in a company that never books women's wrestling.
Yeah, I'm not saying they're not good wrestlers. Like, but they're like they were young, and like this was and Daisy Hayes got better over time. This was before Shimmer existed. There just weren't a lot of opportunities for ring time for them. But so I'm not trying to sound like Mark Nolte here. Like this, but but this match wasn't much more than it could have been. I really feel like Nolte's commentary, you really sensed just how truly he believed that women were inferior when it comes to wrestling. You know what I mean? Like, Gabe was trying to sell it. And obviously he didn't show the women the same respect as men, but Nolte, it just felt like more in his bones, which I mean, I think we knew, based on other things he said over time, but he goes there are women out there who are good athletes in all sports, not in just wrestling. And then Nolte says college women's basketball does good ratings from time to time on ESPN.
Oh, God.
Gabe goes, when they're doing like their like roll up fish out of water type sequence, Gabe's like, "This is looking good," and I'm not just talking about their looks. This is some good wrestling. Um,
Even when they're trying to put over the wrestling as serious, like they still can't help but be like, they're hot men, aren't they?
yeah, and
Like,
there's less of that here, but yeah, but Gabe definitely comes in with that a bunch of times. Um, they mention women's soccer being popular, and Nolte mentions the University of North Carolina, and Nolte says, "Yes, it does scare me that I know who won the NCAA women's soccer tournament." And it's just like, why? Like, I mean, how is that any scarier than knowing who won any sports thing? Um, Nolte at one point just says Tracy has a size advantage here, totally normal, innocuous wrestling commentary. But Gabe says she's curvy in all the right places, trying not to get too sexist though. And I'm just thinking, like, if you don't respect the women, aren't you at least a little bit afraid of CM Punk kicking your ass for saying something like that? But I guess not. I guess they're cool like that. But like every comment is like some variation on these women can actually wrestle. Women are really people. Like it's just some variation on that. Like Nolte is like, we haven't seen any mistakes or sloppy execution. Could you imagine trying to put over a match by saying that? Like this wasn't as terrible as you might expect. Like
this commentary had like the same energy as a parent praising their 2-year-old for wiping themselves. Like they're just so surprised and so proud of every minor moment to the point where it's just like, yeah, even in their praise, it felt icky in a weird way.
I'm sure at the end, Nolte felt very progressive by calling it a terrific match, but like, it's only a year before Shimmer starts, and the announcing feels like it's from literally like 1940, and they probably would have been more respectful in 1940.
I don't want to psychoanalyze people, especially that I don't really know. But one thing, I actually thought about the Ring of Honor's treatment of women a lot after this match on a couple of long walks. Not walks necessitated by watching this, but just walks in general.
You're like, I got to get out of here and muse on this for a while.
I got to have a think, Matt.
Yeah.
But one thing I was thinking about, You talked about like how we talked about this a lot, how Mark Nolte's vein of misogyny always seems a lot more darker than Gabe's. And I think one difference, and again, maybe I'm completely misreading this, but it always feels like to me like Gabe's treatment of women comes from a less personal place. Like it comes from, he's doing like kind of a combination of the worst of ECW and WWF Attitude Era treatment. Like, that women are there not to wrestle, not to be, they're used there. Women are there in wrestling for like 2 or 3 reasons. 1, to be like pawns in storylines. 2, to be like bitchy heel managers, which is not a bad, Sherry Martel was a bitchy heel manager. She was awesome, but feels like sometimes in Ring of Honor, that's one of the only roles at this point you could have if you're a woman. Or 3, to be sexual titillation. Or I guess 4, to get a cheap shock pop when a guy hits you. And if a lot of that is rooted in that's how ECW largely treated women, and that's how in some points WWF largely treated women.
Gabe was doing what he thought was pandering to his audience.
Yeah, exactly. And Gabe, I felt like even it's disappointing for the obvious reason, and also because Ring of Honor was a company that was always claimed to be about innovation and pushing things forward and breaking away from the mainstream. But in a lot of ways, their treatment of women felt like just like, well, what has everyone else done in the mid to late 90s? Okay, that's what we'll do, and we're not going to think about it any past that. Mark Nolte is like you have said, like it always seems just more personal.
Somebody hurt him.
Yeah, Gabe sounds like he's doing a Jerry Lawler impersonation. Mark Nolte sounds like he's speaking from experience, like you just said. Which is and again, I don't want to psychoanalyze too much, but it's definitely 2 different vibes you get when they talk about women. The other thing I wanted to ask you, Matt, about Ring of Honor's treatment of women, I think what I just mentioned is a lot of why Ring of Honor up to this point didn't give women a fair shake. But I have another theory about another main reason why, and I want to ask you if you agree, which is, if you think about, and I think this will go in later if we talk about the students in their match with the Carnage Crew. Ring of Honor was always, it was the first quote-unquote all-star indie. It was built around the idea of, before this period, independent wrestling was the best wrestlers in your area, which meant you probably had a few guys that were really good in your local scene, and then a bunch of guys that were either really green or weren't that good, but it was low ticket prices. It was just whoever low budget for the roster. It was whoever's in your area. And then you had the King of Indies tournament. You had other tournaments around that time, but it was the first time that there was this idea of, instead of just trying to draw wrestling from a local crowd, we're going to try and get fans from around the country. We're going to get tape sales from like the hardcore fans that really pay attention to this stuff. And we're going to book a card that is nothing but like those 2 or 3 best guys from each regional scene all together. And of course, famously, as we've documented in the past, Ring of Honor, the genesis behind that idea was Rob Feinstein and Doug Gentry and Gabe Sapolsky, after they kind of talked him into believing it could work and getting him to book, to be basically like, what if we just did King of the Indies but made that a promotion? So anyway, why I'm talking about this is, my point is, Ring of Honor was built on like taking really good talent that was established and proven to be great somewhere else, and just as they were reaching like the state of ripeness, like plucking them off the tree and booking them in Ring of Honor and kind of spotlighting them to a new audience and putting them in a position to shine. And women's wrestling, I think one of the reasons, along with just kind of the laziness of trying to copy ECW and WWE's treatment of them, I think it's partly because there wasn't a thriving women's scene all over the country where they could say, oh yeah, like there's these women that already have like a built-in large cult following that are great, that we could do dream matches with this. I mean, I'm sure there were some really hardcore fans would know, but they didn't have followings the way that Christopher Daniels or Low Key or Bryan Danielson did. And I think part of it's that too. It's a sin of just Ring of Honor wasn't thinking about wrestling the way you would need to develop, as opposed to a company like Shimmer, which I feel was part of their goal was like, we're going to spotlight the great women that are here, but we're also going to we're going to make a scene. We're going to develop a scene that isn't there. And I feel like Ring of Honor, that wasn't really their thing.
I think there's truth to what you're saying. I think it lets them off the hook a little bit too much. Like when you think of, they did have Alexis Lurie. They did try to push her as like this like serious wrestling star, but they never gave her a chance to have a good wrestling match. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
they had their opportunities. I'm not saying what you're saying is wrong, because like there is obviously like you want to go with proven draws and like like stars, and like there just weren't that many women who were in that position, but they should have done it anyway. You know what I mean? Like, so I get what you're saying, and it's not wrong, but I think it lets them off the hook just a little too much.
Yeah, well, and again, I want to make clear, I don't think that's the only reason. I think the other thing we talked about, which is just they're kind of lazy, just copying of the worst parts of the recent past.
Yeah, it was an early 2000s pro wrestling business, and they didn't have that level of vision. That's what it is, yeah.
Yeah. But going on, there's one note about this match from the Pro Wrestling Torch after the show occurred. Wade Keller, or someone who wrote for the Torch, because sometimes he had other people write for the Newswire, but it was written in the Torch. Ring of Honor will be introducing more women's matches in the future after a good response to the Tracy Brooks versus Daisy Hayes match October 16th in Chicago. Says Sapolsky, right now we have some quality women on the roster with the additions of Lacey, Daisy Hayes, and Tracy Brooks in 2004, along with regulars like Allison Danger and Becky Bayless. That gives us a really solid roster right now of women that can all have good matches against each other. Daisy and Tracy really came through in Chicago and received a very positive response. In fact, the only complaint I saw of the match was that the fans wanted it to be longer, which is great. I feel that a quality women's match can really add something to a show and to the pacing of the show. I'm not saying you're going to see women's matches on every show, but considering that we had no women matches on main shows in 2004 until Chicago, you will see an increase in 2005. So I will say Gabe did deliver on his promise on having more than one women's match.
Yes.
I guess the other thing we forgot to mention that this reminded me, Matt, is I thought the crowd response for that women's match was interesting, because it felt like half the crowd was really open and excited, like wanted to take it seriously and were cheering for the spots, but there were also some fans, I felt like, that were treating it more in a regressive way. Like you could hear anytime in the grappling when a butt got close to a face, there was some ooze. At one point, a fan very loudly and audibly yells like, "Start kissing," when one of the girls has the other in a headlock, and you can hear some fans laugh at that. So I feel like it was definitely a 50-50 on the fans that were like, "Oh, cool, women's wrestling," and the 50% that was like, "I just want to see boobs and butt." So
Yeah, I mean, I guess all in all, they were more respectful than the commentators, but still not a perfect showing by Chicago right there.
yeah, Dr. Keith, who's in the crowd, I'm sure he reacted the right way, but some of those other people he should have tissed. Definitely.
Exactly. Imagine hearing like a loud tisk, 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 tisk chant.
And he's a tall man, so that tisk, and he was in the front row, that tisk would have carried.
That's true.
A match that did not make to the show. This show, like a lot of Ring of Honor shows, they had to cut something for time. I guess continuing the sad saga of Matt Striker's downfall, Matt Striker defeated Dixie in 3 minutes 10 seconds. So not only did his match only last 3 minutes, did not even make the show. Matt, we never saw it, but even when Matt Striker wins at this point in his Ring of Honor run, he loses. But
oh my God, that's actually like very sad to me to hear that.
Yeah. I was kind of surprised too because, sometimes you don't know these things until you look up the results and like cross-reference them with what you saw. It was like, oh, there's like an extra match here in these live reports that obviously was cut for time. And if you notice, pretty much every match except the last 2 matches before the 60-minute main event are shorter than you would expect from Ring of Honor because obviously they were budgeting out time for a 60-minute main event. But yeah,
Also,
it was
also cut out the entrances.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a great point too. This is a show where Ring of Honor, up to this point, you always got like different length of entrances depending on how short they were on time. But this show was notable where basically you got almost no entrance.
Right. Yeah. I think just until the last 2 matches, like you said.
Yeah. So that brings us to a 4-corner survival match. Josh Daniels defeated Angel Dust, Matt Sydal, and Trent Acid in 6 minutes, 33 seconds when he pinned Angel Dust with a German suplex. So, your usual 4-corner, spot fest match. Matt, this might have gotten 2 or 3 minutes more on a different card that didn't have to have a 60-minute main event. But what'd you think about the time they did get, which isn't that much for 4 guys?
By October 2004 standards, this roster of guys is a little bit like Jobber City. Like, not like Jobber, but like Matt Sydal was not established yet in ROH. Angel Dust was not at the peak of his successes. Neither was Josh Daniels. And Trent Acid, I think, had lost a lot of cachet by this point. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like, he's kind of in the same spot Matt Striker is in, which is he's still technically booked for the shows, but Ring of Honor, he's kind of just playing out the string. His push is done.
He's still the most over guy in the match. Like, there's a "We Want Acid" chant as Angel Dust and Sydal are wrestling. And Gabe, just like the night before, was like, Izzy is strung out on drugs. And I'm just like, but you're going to book him again? Like, he missed the show because he's strung out, but you're going to book him again? Yeah, the Acid is still doing the whole thing where he's dressed very badly and the announcers give him crap over that. And he seems kind of out of it, but he's blind tagging himself in, and taunting, but he keeps getting attacked. Like, he gets hit with a sudden head scissors by Sydal, and then but Acid is like, he's cutting people off. Daniels goes for a dive, Acid cuts him off, and then that allows Sydal to come off the top with like a double stomp to the back of Daniels' neck. So that was like a good little setup sequence there. Some of the other big spots, Angel Dust hit a moonsault off the top to the pile, although he really only hit Sydal there. Then Daniels chopped everybody. Angel Dust is kicking Daniels, but Daniels catches his leg, chops him down. Angel Dust hits a double stomp to the back of Daniels' head. So I wrote this down. How many wrestlers do you think have been double stomped in the back of the head by 2 different wrestlers in the same match? Because Josh Daniels was once by Sydal and once by Angel Dust. I'm trying to think if that's ever happened before or since. Probably, but I can't think of another example. Sydal, he went for the shooting star press, but Daniel moves. But Sydal landed on his feet, which is still impressive to me 16 years later. So Daniels hit a bridging suplex on Angel Dust right as Acid hit like a curtain call. Does Acid have a name for that move? Gabe
Um,
called it his finish, and this is not an example of of Acid being a new wrestler. So Gabe
I
should have
always
known.
just say like inverted brainbuster, which I guess is the technical term for the move, but I don't know if he had like an actual.
Yeah.
The only move of his signature move of his I know the name of is the Dream Sequence, which is actually a tag team sequence of moves he did with Johnny Casher and the Backseat Boys.
Well,
Which
and the T gimmick.
oh yeah, and the T gimmick. But again, I guess that goes to the point, which again, if Trent Acid does have the name for this move, it goes to the point I made earlier, which is you never know with these announcers. Like guys can hit a finisher, and you're like, is that his finisher? Because they're not telling me. Like, or if they do, they don't know its name. You're like, that's weird.
Yep, I agree. But they both hit those moves, but the ref counted Angel Dust as Daniels was pinning him, didn't count Acid's pin on Seidel, so Daniels won the match. So Acid didn't lose; he had Seidel beat, but he didn't get the win. So he was very upset. But it's funny because this is another loss for the more focused Special K. The match was short, didn't really have any story. Really, other than the story of frustrated Trent Acid. I guess there were some good spots in there, so it wasn't a total waste, but it wasn't like a good match or anything.
Yeah, this is another thing, just middle of the road, where, like you said, there's some good spots, but because it was short and probably maybe it just wasn't quite up to snuff, it wasn't as fun as like a really good like 10-minute four-corner survival where everyone's just going really nuts, and it just feels like there's a bit more meat on the bone. This felt a little bit more inconsequential than your normal four-way random undercard spot fest, which is already an inconsequential kind of match on the card. But I did think that Josh Daniels, he did get to at least kind of be interesting, where you got three more high spot flying oriented guys and him getting to be the guy who's just chopping and hitting guys hard. That was a little bit of an interesting dynamic. I thought Angel Dust, he was getting hyped really hard on the commentary on this night, and I think he was having one of his more botchy nights, and Angel Dust already is one of the more botchy guys in general in Ring of Honor. Like, he lost a headlock.
He's like an old Italian man because he's a bocce guy.
Okay. But yeah, there's a moment where like he does one of those spots where you grab a headlock and the guy tries to throw you off and you kind of just slide down on your knees. And I don't know if I've ever seen this before. He actually loses the headlock like when he's not supposed to. He like pops out. He also fucks up a tilt-a-whirl backbreaker shortly after that. So not a great night for him, even though this felt like a night where the commentary was really trying to like spotlight him a bit. You didn't get to see much from Seidel. I thought he looked good as usual in what he did do. He took a crazy bump where Trent Acid kind of just threw him over his head, like in the air, and Seidel landed on his ass on the top turnbuckle and then immediately fell off it to the floor. And it was just like, I haven't seen many guys like taking a spot where you get thrown and then land ass first on the top turnbuckle like that. And I have to imagine that doesn't feel great unless you're really lucky about how your tailbone hits. But Matt Seidel trying to get noticed, and yeah, not much to the match. And I guess it's interesting that Trent Acid, they still gave him that little out you described where it's a double pin, but only the other guy's pin counts because Trent Acid wasn't the legal man. I guess it's interesting that even though it feels like they're burying him on commentary and knowing that he's only around a few more shows, there's still, like later we're going to see he gets a promo still.
It seems like there is still hope that they can do something with Trent Acid.
Even though the promo and booking and the commentary all points in the direction of what actually does happen, which is him leaving, which it's just weird. It's like a storyline, but then what the storyline hints at actually happens, but not which you would say, well, that's what storylines are supposed to do. But yeah, but I would say this is a storyline that's about him basically sucking and then deciding I'm going to quit, and it happens. But anyway, you screwed Trent chant from the crowd, from a few people in the crowd, maybe not the whole crowd after the match, so he still had some fans. And that brings us to Chad Collier and Nigel McGuinness, scored to the ring by Ricky Steamboat. They defeated BJ Whitmer and Dan Moff, who were scored to the ring by Mick Foley in 11 minutes flat when Nigel pinned Whitmer with a pinning combination after Steamboat told him to use his wrestling like Prince Nana would tell Jimmy Rave to think of all the jewels if you win this match. But before we get to the match, we get to probably what was the much more notable part of this segment, which is before the match, we get a huge Mick Foley chant, followed by a weaker Ricky Steamboat chant. They're both in the ring. Ricky grabs the mic and he asks the wrestlers to clear out for a second because he wants to talk to Mick one-on-one. Steamboat at this point, he recaps the challenge that led to the match tonight where, Mick said, hey, how about you take two of your pure wrestling guys, I'll take my two hardcore guys, we'll find out what's the best style. Steamboat again says he thinks his style of wrestling is better than Mick Foley's. Steamboat reuses his "you sure put the icing on the cake" line that he used the night before, so clearly Ricky is in love with the icing on the cake line. Ricky says he thinks Foley epitomizes garbage wrestling, and in fact, he got an email from the Chicago Sanitation Department saying that when Foley's next book fails, they'll have a job waiting for him. Steamboat then at this point started acting like he dropped the sickest burn ever, like making just the goofiest facial expressions, which I have to admit I laughed at.
Because you never saw Steamboat in that light ever before or since.
Yeah, he told a dad joke he was acting like he just did the sickest burn on a Def Comedy Jam or something, just insane. Foley then takes the mic. He gets a big pop. I should note at this point that Steamboat was getting boos for some of his comments on Mick. This crowd's definitely, they like Steamboat, but they're definitely more pro Mick than pro Rick. And at any point where Steamboat was kind of saying something that was making them choose, they were choosing Foley. Foley says, alert the media, he just heard Steamboat tell a joke. Mick says it was the first time in his career that Ricky actually said something entertaining. Mick, though, then puts Steamboat over. He points out that in 1989, Ricky Steamboat beat Ric Flair in Chicago in one of the greatest bouts of all time, and he says that Ricky might be the greatest pure wrestler of all time. He asks the crowd to give Steamboat a big hand. At this point, Foley then says, though, that saying someone that is the greatest pure wrestler of all time is like saying they're the greatest softcore porn actor. They're just not the real deal. So, both these guys reusing some of the material they used the night before with the whole softcore thing here. Mick does continue to retread some of the material from his promo the night before in Dayton, complete with him calling Ricky the softcore dragon. Mick asks how long is Ricky going to ride the coattails of a washed-up loser like Ric Flair. Mick gets a big pop for saying that. Ric Flair's mention gets mostly boos. Steamboat says he knows Flair. He's worked Flair. Mick is no Ric Flair. Mick says, that's right. I don't have a banana nose. I don't have horse teeth. I don't look like Barbara Bush in drag. Steamboat says, that was funny when Terry Funk said that years ago, which I thought was a good line. Foley then says, okay, I'm no Ric Flair because I never kissed Triple H's ass. I've never carried Batista's bags. I actually say something different once in a while, and because I actually put my body on the line and didn't do anything stupid like this. Mick at this point does a Flair flop to some laughs and a pop. Mick says he never stuck a needle in his ass to keep his tits from flopping in the wind. He never compared his genitals to a Disney theme park ride, but most of all, he's no Ric Flair because he knew his time was up and he stepped aside for younger wrestlers. And he says that Steamboat did the same, but not Flair, who has stuck around for another extra 15 years. Mick says he's here to introduce the new kings of hardcore, Moff and Whitmer, and they're going to find out what the better style is right now. Matt, before we talk about the match, I guess we should talk about the promo. How about you just say, before I say what I thought about, what do you say first? I will note, regardless of what we think about this, you do have to admit, Matt, the crowd, I think, was going nuts for Mick Foley. They were kind of I thought they were eating out of the palm of his hand, everything he said here.
It's just one of those things that only worked in the time that it happened. And probably mostly for the live crowd. It was cool to see Mick Foley and Ricky Steamboat do promos on each other at that time. It doesn't have the novelty so many years later that it did then. So what we're left with is the content, and the content did not work for me. I didn't buy Mick Foley making fun of the idea of good wrestlers. You know what I mean? That whole concept, that if you're just a pure wrestler, you're soft core, that doesn't strike me as something Mick Foley would say or think. You know what I mean? It didn't seem true to him.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say Mick Foley, like some of his favorite matches that he described in his book were like versus Shawn Michaels and Sting. Like they weren't like my favorite matches, the King of the Death matches. His favorite matches were like straight up Rick Steamboat ass regular wrestling matches.
He's also just a respectful guy who's like not like that, you know, like, and it just didn't seem true to Mick Foley. Steamboat obviously was having fun, got to do a little bit, but he obviously, promos are not his thing. Like he did a lot of repeats from the night before. You know, when I think I was more disappointed with Mick's stuff because like, you know, like it just like when he starts going like I'm not Ric Flair because I never kissed Triple H's ass or carried Batista's bags. It's like you're kind of putting over WWE storylines right now. You know, like you're not cutting some edgy promo. Like that's what a wrestler in WWE would have said to Ric Flair at that time on TV. You know what I mean? Like that you're just a stooge for Triple H. Also, did Foley never kiss Triple H's ass? I feel like he's at least a little bit kissed Triple H's ass. Obviously the steroid comment that's a little bit darker. But I don't know. Like this is just it just doesn't work. You know, it's you gotta judge it by what it meant to be at the time, and it worked at the time. It doesn't work for me now at all. I just don't buy this concept that these two guys would be feuding over like which style of wrestling is better. And I just don't buy. Mick didn't strike me as being himself here, which is what you'd want, you know, for it to really be a memorable angle that holds up. You want him to be true to his character, and I don't think this was true to Mick Foley's character.
Yeah, I agree. We've gone to this a few times now that we think that we haven't been a big fan of the Steamboat Foley angle just because, yeah, it doesn't feel true. And that's especially telling with Foley because Foley's a guy he wrote in his first autobiography, something he noted that he did, which was often he would usually try and find like a germ of real emotion in his promos, in his feuds. Like he would try and find something that he really felt and then just exaggerate it or push it in a different direction. And so for a guy that was kind of known for trying to make his promos feel at least somewhat authentic and putting his own history and his feelings into things, like these really feel in a lot of ways inauthentic. Like the part of it I will say that does feel authentic is when he switches from talking about hardcore versus pure wrestling and Steamboat to calling down Flair. You can tell like that's coming from a place of real frustration that right. Foley at this point in his career was not happy. Like the tone is completely different.
Right. They did not like each other at this point in time, for sure.
You like the insults I described, they just feel like they're never ending. Like he probably has like a notepad with 20 more backstage of things he would say about Ric Flair.
But like carrying Batista's bags, like that's a corny insult. Like, yeah, he's his protege, like on the TV show. Like, come on.
But and I always thought it was interesting that you focused on those because I thought the ones you would point out were the other ones because he's talking about stuff like I got out of the business when it was my time. He had already gone back on his retirement, and granted, it was to have a great match with Randy Orton. That really was probably Randy Orton's career highlight. But Mick Foley would continue to come back sporadically.
Mick Foley's also much younger than Rick. Well, not much. He's younger than Ric Flair by a decent amount. Like that does make some difference, right?
No, that's true. But and even when he says that Flair stuck around, like he said 15 years. And remember, this was 2004. So he's saying that Ric Flair should have retired in 1989. That was maybe his most celebrated year. That'd be like going out. He wanted him to pull a Seinfeld, Matt. He wanted him to go out on top. Like, I mean,
yeah. Well, that's one thing. I don't think that Mick Foley really thought that. Like that's another thing I'm saying. I don't think Mick Foley really thought that Ric Flair should have retired 15 years before 2004. That's another strike against this.
So, yeah, like you said, like we've been going on a lot of these, I thought very charismatic deliveries, especially from Foley. I even like Ricky's kind of awkward dad babyface charm more than I think a lot of people reading reviews of this stuff. But, yeah, just the content isn't really working. But, Matt, this actually worked for a lot of people because let's go before the match to the reaction to this promo. I was shocked at the raves this got from some people. We'll go to Wade Keller first, who wrote, the Mick Foley-Ricky Steamboat verbal exchange on the latest Ring of Honor home video release from October 16th in Chicago was one of the best 10-minute stretches of wrestling mic work I've seen all year. Steamboat was as good as I've ever seen him, really loosening up and having fun with his square persona of the past. Foley's comments on Flair were delivered with a perfect cadence where they didn't just come across as overly mean-spirited, just truthful, even while obviously trying to get revenge for Flair's comments about him in his book. Order the video or DVD at ringofhonorwrestling.com. It contains a very good wrestling card, too. Going to the PW Torch, elsewhere in the newsletter, they got comments from Gabe Sapolsky about these promos. Sapolsky says, in my opinion, Mick Foley is the greatest promo in the wrestling in the wrestling history. That's a weird phrase, on a true genius level. When you are fortunate enough to work with a talent like that, you give him a rough direction of what needs to be accomplished in the promo and where it is going, and you let him come up with the rest, and then you sit back and enjoy the brilliance in the ring. And then finally, Dave Meltzer in The Observer wrote, this wasn't Dave review. I thought, Matt, this was a line Dave wrote that made me laugh. Dave wrote, based on a live report, he hadn't seen the show yet. Foley then said that, unlike Flair, he knew when the time was up and got out of the business so that younger and better wrestlers could succeed. And then he pointed to Moff and Whitmer. Dave then writes, well, he killed his point when he pointed at them. And I thought, wow, that is a harsh burn from Dave Meltzer on Moff and Whitmer, which it's not necessarily untrue, but like I wonder how much Moff and Whitmer David even watched at this point in his life.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know, man. You could be a little bit nicer than that. You didn't have to be that harsh.
Yeah, like I agree that like saying that these are the new generation, yeah, that does hurt your credibility a bit, but it's not like they're terrible.
Harley Race agreed.
As Mark Nolte would remind us over and over during the match, which I guess we should talk about. But really, honestly, the match does feel in a lot of ways like an afterthought to the promo. And the match really, it is a match. It does go long enough, has enough wrestling in it to be a match, but it does feel more like a promo, an angle than a match. Basically, it's two matches. The first half of the match is a straight-up wrestling match. Collier and Nigel dominate the wrestling part, as you might expect. I thought they looked fairly good as a team. In particular, I liked that Dan Moff, he countered an arm lock when he hoisted Chad Collier into a slam position, and Collier still held onto the arm lock. And then Nigel ran in and broke it up by hitting a crossbody onto Collier while Moff was holding on to him. Like, I thought that was a really cool moment. But that was basically the highlight, just a lot of arm work. Then the Carnage Crew run in. They try and attack Mick Foley a little bit, but they kind of don't do much. And then they run the ring and basically yell at him from in the ring. The match just gets thrown out because they're attacking people. Double DQ, I guess another example of the new Ring of Honor taking the rules more seriously again. But at this point, Mick Foley restarts the match. He decides it's going to be a hardcore match now. The Pure Wrestling guys still control with their Pure Wrestling for a short time. But then there's a nice spot where BJ Whitmer he's in an arm lock, but he pulls the guy that's arm locking him, I forget which of the two it was, into the path of the other guy who's doing a flying elbow from the top. That lets him make the hot tag. From there, they brawl all over the crowd. We get some chair shots, etc. Moff and Whitmer dominate the hardcore part. Finally, Ricky Steamboat comes back out because he had chased the Carnage Crew to the back with chairs.
Because he was so mad that they had ruined a good wrestling match. That's what they said. He was mad that the Carnage Crew ruined the pure wrestling match because there was so much wrestling going on.
And I forget if they kind of acknowledge it. I think they kind of reference it, but they never play it up. But like, here's Ricky Steamboat, the guy who is about pure wrestling is better than hardcore wrestling. And what does he do when someone ruins his good wrestling match? He grabs a steel chair and chases them. So like, the hardcore wrestling came in handy when it was time for that. But anyway, hardcore match, Moff and Whitmer dominate. Finally, Steamboat makes his way back to the ring. He gets on the mic, like I said before, like he's Prince Nana, trying to hype up Jimmy Rave in his recent gimmick where Rave is always on the ropes and then Nana's mic work gets him to make a comeback. He goes, Nigel, use your pure wrestling. Which I felt was kind of corny because Nigel at that point immediately does. He does a little British reversal sequence, gets into a pinning combination, wins the match out of nowhere.
I guess it was sort of like an Obi-Wan kind of thing, right? Like use the Force.
Yeah, it's always such a goofy moment, but it wasn't boring, but it also wasn't amazing, and it's another thing also where it felt like these guys, the wrestlers, were basically just pawns in the Mick Foley Steamboat angle, so in that sense, they're not really getting much of a rub. I mean, it's just, it's just a thing. It's just a continuation of an angle I'm not that huge into. Matt, I mean, did you see more about? Did you think more of this match than I did, or were you kind of like me, where you just like so overwhelmed by just how much of this was about that angle?
Yeah, no, it wasn't. I mean, it was a mess, I thought, a little bit. I'm just not into this whole thing. I thought Nigel looked good. Like, I think he always looks good, like, in what he does. I do like that he ended up winning the hardcore match with, like, the Artful Dodger stuff. Like, I think that is a fun ending. I do think it's funny that the crowd chanted bullshit after that, because I'm just like, wait, how is that bullshit? He just won. He won the match. Yeah, I don't know. There was a lot of, the hardcore part of the match just felt like aimless hitting, which a lot of these matches do. Maybe that's why Meltzer dissed Moff and Whitmer. But, Moff throwing a garbage can at Collier, Whitmer hitting McGinnis on the top of the head with the chair, which is, always, Nigel likes to take shots to the head. That's the thing about his career. And so he did that here too. But it was almost like battle royal type offense for a bit. Like they were just sort of like hitting each other and like choking each other in the corner and like doing this and that. So there just wasn't that much. A couple cool spots. Exploder onto the chair on Collier and then that Artful Dodger finish. No, the angle really doesn't work for me. Again, like that doesn't mean it's bad. Like it was an angle that worked in a very specific time and place and doesn't work later. Which is whatever, it is what it is.
Yeah, the fans definitely liked seeing those guys live, and obviously the newsletters liked at least the Wade loved the promos, and the fans on this night loved the promos. And I guess I have to remind myself that at the time, after Flair put out his autobiography and trashed Foley, that was like something people were really interested in for a while. The idea that Mick Foley and Ric Flair were having this really public feud, which I feel like that happens now in wrestling every 3 months from two wrestlers. But
thanks to Twitter, you didn't need a book. You don't need a book for it anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Back then, it was more of a novelty. Now it's just
I get it. Pun intended, right? Novelty. But there were a couple.
I wish I was that clever.
There were a couple of commentary things. Mainly one, when Nolte was like at the end of that promo where Nolte goes, I haven't seen Steamboat that intense since he bounced Lex Luger's steroided ass all over Chicago. I'm like, Jesus, Mark, like, you're just letting it all out, huh?
He has some odd grudges. Like,
yeah, he had some anger in him. And then at the end, Steamboat like kind of knelt down to, or he actually went over to Foley and he said, we've got one and you've got goose egg, because he's real cool and he calls Zero goose egg. But that'll come into play a little bit later, I guess.
And one other thing I noticed from the time reading like the observers leading up to this, I always find this interesting because so many wrestlers speak of how great an influence Steamboat was on them in his brief time with Ring of Honor backstage. And Dave wrote about it at the time a little bit in the Observer. He writes, Steamboat's main role in Ring of Honor is as a coach for all the younger wrestlers. Among the lessons he was talking about were the art of interfering behind the ref's back, because so much of the crew grew up on ECW, where Paul Heyman never bothered with distracting the refs, and the refs just stood there and just never DQ'd anyone and allowed anything to happen. He also tried to emphasize more logical kickouts, in that everyone always kicks out at 2.75, and he thinks, dependent on the severity of the move, you should be doing more kicking out at 1, and even sometimes before the 1 count, so that later in the match, when you do the 2.75s, they'll mean more. So I thought that was really interesting for a couple reasons. One, because that whole point about the crew grew up on ECW, I think Gabe, either on this show or the last show, said basically that word for word. So you know who like was talking to Dave about Ricky Steamboat here? It was Gabe, obviously, because it's his words. But also, I think probably like the refs, we're definitely seeing the refs' rulings being taken more seriously on this, starting with this double shot. We'll see how long that lasts, and we're seeing more the interference being done better, which I think Steamboat's complaint that's right in front of the refs was a complaint we were having. But the one thing I guess we'll have to notice more, because I haven't noticed it yet. Have you been noticing any like 1 or 2 count kickouts, like rather than just the always kick out right before 3?
In the main event, there were some, but I've actually thought maybe I just would thought from later things, but I always thought the ROH guys actually were decent about that. Whereas it was more WWE that was always like, 2 3/4. But I did notice some earlier kickouts in the Punk versus Joe match. I will say that.
But I continue to emphasize because I think he's a great example for older veterans, which is so many veterans, they go like one of two extremes. They're either like, well, I don't understand everything these kids are doing, but hey, the kids, I don't want to be seen as out of touch, so I'm going to agree with everything they do. Or you go the Jim Cornette route where you just get bitter and think you're resistant to all change. I think the thing people keep saying Steamboat did so well back then was he would not try and change them like fundamentally what they were, but he would do more things like this, like around the edges, like the detail work, which
Take the stuff that you do, but just make it better. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a reason. That's probably not a coincidence why he was so beloved by these wrestlers from this era, because he wasn't like telling them that what they did fundamentally was shitty. It was more just, yeah, like you just said, here's how you can make it better. Here's how you can tweak things, which is, I think, a great way to be a coach. But
Yep.
Moving on, after the match, some fans applaud, many others boo. Like Matt said. I'm glad you remembered the goose egg thing because I wrote in my notes, Steamboat gets on the mic and tells Foley he's up 1-0. So I missed. I didn't preserve the goose egg, Matt. So I'm glad you did. Next, we're at intermission backstage with Dave Prazak, who is on this night. He's all cleaned up. He's in a nice suit, and he looks very sharp. He's joined by a bummed out Trent Acid. Trent says he feels like an outcast here in Ring of Honor, and he doesn't think he can stand it much longer. Spoiler, he won't have to stand it much longer. Not much to this.
He also says he's going to snap if it doesn't stop, but we never get to the point in ROH where they show him snapping.
Yeah, again, I don't know if there was larger plans that were aborted, and this was just a coincidence, but it continues to be interesting that they're basically doing somewhat of a storyline saying that like Trent Acid might be on his way out, and then he's really on his way out. But that brings us to the Carnage crew of Logan DeVito defeated Davey Andrews and TJ Dalton in 4 minutes, 22 seconds when DeVito pins Andrews after a second rope spike pile driver. Matt, we finally got to see, we didn't get to see it in the first half. This is, I guess, now the real first substantial match a Ring of Honor rookie student has ever gotten in Ring of Honor. What'd you think of it?
The Carnage crew, I guess, give those two guys a little bit more than I maybe would have expected. It was still just a squash match, but they do get to hit a couple of moves, like they do a double backdrop on DeVito and like a double pancake spot on Loke. Somehow, even though the Carnage crew hit a Doomsday device on Dalton, that doesn't end the match. And Andrews gets like a hot tag and looks kind of okay. He has lots of fire, but he has some hesitancy doing the moves, which is pretty understandable. It's his second match ever, they said. So can't really hold that against him. But, then Logan and Vito, they hit the Carnage Plex, the Splash Mountain Neckbreaker, Spike Pile Driver, and it's a squash match. So, yeah, it's a squash match. What's to say about it? It was a squash match.
Yeah, like you said, they got a little more offense than you'd think, but it was mostly a squash match. And like you said, I think Davey Andrews, you don't know what to expect from him because it's his second match, but he was also praised as, the top student. And he does have, like you said, great fire. And that you would think a lot of times usually wrestlers get the mechanics first and everything else second. But that was kind of his strength here, was he just looked like he was really showing good intensity. But I think we're going to probably have to talk about this a lot through the next year or two of Ring of Honor. But the way Ring of Honor handled students, it was just, I think they got a raw deal because it's really hard to be starting wrestling and have no in-ring experience, and you're already getting thrown into a company where it's all about selling you like the absolute best on the indies. And because of that, I feel like Ring of Honor was hesitant to ever give these guys a chance, which if you're just trying to put on the best show possible, I completely understand that. But the problem is then, why even have these guys on in the first place then? Like, it's kind of like a no-win scenario. The guys don't get much experience. They don't really come off as stars, but they also aren't. It's just a weird thing. And you see a lot of these rookies will get these 3-minute, 4-minute matches, and they'll actually become better known more for their gimmicks than for their match quality.
Yeah, I mean, our friend Shane Hagedorn, from an honorable mention, he actually becomes, pretty successful over the years. In terms of he develops a character way before the other students do. He, he gets involved in bigger and bigger storylines, and he's involved in some memorable stuff. But, it's like in some ways they put you in a position to help you do that because you're with these, top guys. But in another way, like you said, it's almost like they're giving you an uphill battle because you're fighting for time in a company that has all these like absolute top wrestlers in the world in it. And how are you going to compare? And it's not like they ever put the students in long matches with these guys so they can get better. So it's a tough position to be in. I'd actually be curious to hear more from guys like Shane about what that seems like in hindsight. I'm sure at the time it was kind of like just a whirlwind.
Yeah, because it's funny, like, because even Davey Andrews here, he's wearing the all black trunks with nothing adoring them, almost like the Japanese, like New Japan Young Lion thing. Except when you think about it, New Japan, they make those guys, work at the dojo for a long time and then just wrestle mostly each other or get squashed by stars. But for like a year or two before they even then let them do anything more than like basic moves, then they send them on an excursion to another country for a while, and then only then do they start bringing them back. And even you think about all the wrestlers in Ring of Honor, whether it be Danielson, Low Key, Daniels, any of those guys, none of those guys started in Ring of Honor as rookies. They got good on their local scenes and then were brought into Ring of Honor and pushed immediately, right from the start of the company. And it's just, I feel sad for these guys, even though some of them had, decent careers as different kinds of figures like Shane Hagedorn, and managers.
Rhett Titus, some of their careers aren't over yet. Also, that's worth noting.
Yeah, I feel like it was not the best way for these guys to come up. It probably would have been better if after the Ring of Honor school they said, look, you guys, we want you guys to work nothing but other places for a couple years, and then when you're ready, we'll bring you in with a push like you're just like anyone else that we'd bring in, rather than immediately they're treated just almost like the women wrestlers, like they're treated like a novelty, But
yeah, they rounded out a lot of the pre-shows for a long time.
Yeah, exactly.
or the first match after intermission, which gets 3 minutes. One of those.
Yeah, but like I said, I have more thoughts. I almost feel like saving them because I'm sure we're going to see a lot more of the rookies. So
we have many more shows where this will be a topic of conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll have to go over this a lot. So after the match for the second straight night, I noted DeVito screams a promo into the handheld cam that isn't used. So we don't get the actual promo. We just see from the hard cam that he's screaming directly, I think, into Shane Hagedorn, who was working the ringside cam. His handheld. Loke then gets on the mic and announces that Ricky Steamboat better watch his back. So they're playing that up. Up next, we have third last match of the night, really the first match of the show to get a good amount of ring time. Generation Next of Jack Evans and Roderick Strong defeats the Rottweilers of Homicide and Rocky Romero in 17 minutes, 27 seconds when Evans pins Romero after he hits the 630 splash. Matt, I think you should go. The last match wasn't much to speak of, and I think you should get to do this match next, especially because I think we both liked it, but I think you probably liked it maybe from just the little bit we talked about this before. That you liked it even more than me. What'd you think about this match?
I thought this was a quite good athletic tag team match. I actually thought that Homicide and Romero had a better match together than the Havana Pitbulls have had in ROH. I don't know if you thought something similar, but
oh, absolutely,
yeah, but it was interesting because it's in most promotions it's pretty hard to do a heel versus heel match, right? Because who do you cheer for? But in this case, it's like the crowd sort of treated it more like a babyface versus babyface match, which is helpful because crowds cheer babyfaces and they don't really have to worry about booing anyone. They do a lot of good athletic stuff. Evans does a tope con hilo, but with an Evans style flip right off the bat onto Homicide. So it's not like Homicide's usual tumble. It's a much weirder angle tumble, but still a tope con hilo. And it's all action until it settles into a regular tag match. But, all the high impact stuff, it sort of works here, because they don't really have that face heel story to tell. So they should kind of hit each other. Nolte says this was the first match in a while for Homicide with no issue. So we're seeing him wrestle more than we have in a while. But He had that match against Nigel McGuinness a couple shows earlier. That was a total wrestling match. And the match against Punk, I wouldn't say was like a brawl. That was more of a wrestling match, right? So
yeah, I mean, he used a foreign object, but it was basically just a balls to the wall 17-minute wrestling match.
Which is sort of what this kind of is too.
Yeah.
The Rottweilers, they do get the heat on Roderick Strong for a while, and then Evan gets in, he does some offense, he does like a vertical suplex on Homicide, quickly tags out. So this is when Strong, he does that thing where he lifts Evans by the leg, which so Evans sort of jumps off of his hand and does a flip splash onto Homicide. I forget if they had done that before in their previous tag team matches.
They had at least once or twice. This was becoming I think that was basically, other than the Ode to the Bulldogs, that was their first regular double team they came up with.
Yeah, they also did a spot where Roderick Strong sort of lawn darted Evans into Homicide in the corner. I always enjoy that, where Strong uses Evans as a weapon. I definitely like that. Then Generation Next takes over. They hit a they kind of, on Homicide, they get a Boston Crab on Homicide. And Homicide does the most interesting move toward the ropes I've ever seen. So usually when you get someone in a Boston Crab, they move away from the person putting them in the crab, right, toward the ropes. Homicide pushed towards Strong, and he pushed Strong into the ropes to get to the ropes. Have you ever seen that before?
No, I never have.
It's very weird. But I thought, it's always fun to see something new, even if it's not a major part of the match. But so, Homicide hits a big DDT. Romero does a camel clutch. And Strong breaks it up with a loud chop to Romero's back. So no one really gets the heat for too long, which makes sense because there are no faces. But Evans does get worked over for a few minutes. And Romero kicks the crap out of him and slaps him, and the crowd loves that. Romero and Homicide, they do a Boston Crab, camel clutch simultaneous combination. Then Homicide, this is a cool sequence. So Homicide hits an Alabama Slam on Jack Evans. Then he slingshots Evans into Romero without letting go of his legs once. Romero slaps him, and then he falls back over Homicide's knee, and then Romero comes over off the top with a knee to Evans. I thought that was a really cool, seamless little sequence. And then at another point, Homicide and Romero, they take Evans, they just lift him over their heads, and they just chuck him over the top rope into the guardrail. That was wild to me. They threw him all the way from the ring into the guardrail, and they just, no control. They're just psh, throw him out there. Almost like Bam Bam Bigelow with Spike Dudley, but it's two guys who are much smaller than Bam Bam Bigelow.
It's the fun-size version of that spot.
Yeah. So they do the Ode to the Bulldogs off of Romero onto Homicide for 2. Homicide comes back with a low blow, because you need that in ROH, as we've said, and a back rake. And then the Rottweilers do a Steiner style, super bulldog off the top rope, and Romero gets 2 on Roderick for that. At one point, Homicide hits a pile driver on Strong. Evans spin kicks Homicide, and at this point, it's they're really doing a lot of focus on the legal man, and it's kind of confusing who it is, but that'll come into play for the finish, because Homicide, he double underhooks Evans off the top, and then he hits a tiger driver on Evans. Romero covers, but Strong pulls him off. Then Homicide lariats Evans out of his boots, but the ref won't count because Homicide isn't legal. So that's where that comes into play. They really wanted to push the whole legal man thing. So then Homicide gets tagged in. He splashes Roderick for 2. And I think at this point, it looks almost like they lose a little bit of momentum. They kind of are not sure what to do. I don't know if you got that sense. At the last, maybe 3 minutes of the match, they sort of were a little bit lost after things had been going so smoothly. But Strong hit his double knees to Homicide's gut. He does his old, over, Splash Mountain flip face plant hold on Romero. It was his original finisher. I don't know how to explain it. He gets him in the Splash Mountain position, then he spins him downward and drops. So then Homicide lariats Roderick out of the ring. Evans hits a 360 on Romero and pins him. Gabe notes that Evans wasn't the legal man, but I think he was. I'm not positive about that. But it just shows that it must be really hard for referees to really keep track of a legal man in one of these types of matches. I thought the match had some storytelling gaps, but I just thought it had good action. And I thought Evans and Strong are just such a good team together. And the Rottweilers did a good job of holding the match together. So I thought it was good. Like I would say this was a good match with a lot of good spots. Not perfect, but good.
Yeah, if I had to give this like a star rating, which I don't do for a lot of matches, I would say like a 3.5, maybe 3 3/4, somewhere in that range.
Oh
probably
yeah,
3.5.
so we liked it on a very similar level, I would say.
Yeah, like it's a fun, like this is a tag match you're happy to have on a wrestling show. It's fun. It's not something you go out of your way to see, but it's a fun match. I felt like Homicide had a hell of a weekend on this double shot because the night before was the CM Punk match, and when I mentioned this match being similar to the last one, you mentioned that too, that this was kind of the similar. Yeah, I really do think this is kind of like the tag version of the last of his match with Punk the night before, because they're both, I think, around 17 minutes, and they're both just they don't have a lot of story, either of them. I think this had even less story than the Punk match, but they're just go, 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 kind of never let up, other than maybe, like you said, maybe there's a little bit of a little bump in the road for a second, but for the most part, just really good, fun action that just right from the get-go that never lets up, where it's not where you're ever going just out of my mind, this is the best thing I've ever seen, but you're just like, this is fun, and it's going to keep being fun the whole way through. And I thought this was a weekend where we've always talked about how Homicide is like one of the most versatile wrestlers of his generation, and he can do so many great styles. I feel like this weekend is probably the best example we've seen of him just doing like the go, go, go kind of modern for the era indie style, where sometimes I feel like some people feel like Homicide isn't his strength, but I feel like here he's just doing cool moves and working a real fast pace, and he's as good as anyone else in these matches. And like, it's just another example of how he could basically do anything on a really high level. I thought while everyone did their roles and was good in this match, I thought the other star of it was Jack Evans. I love Jack Evans. I'm probably going to continue to say that. I think his bumping here, like I almost want to say selling, but it's not his facial expressions. It's his body language. Like when he takes bumps, the guys look like they're really killing him. And no one in Ring of Honor, or maybe many people in wrestling, does like the dead fish body language after a bump the way Jack Evans does. He just goes limp on a lot of big spots. Like he's just dead. Like his soul has left his body. And I think
does he still do that? I don't really notice that as much from him these days.
I'm not sure.
That type of selling.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Honestly, there isn't much recent Jack Evans to watch. I think they said like he's going to wrestle QT Marshall on AEW Dark, they said, next week, and I think they said that's his second match this year because of the COVID. So I haven't seen much recent Jack Evans, but yeah, I'll have to pay attention to that next time I do. But definitely at this point, he was really willing to just go almost over the top in making everyone look like they were killing him. I thought that like the Rottweilers got a really good reaction for beating down Evans, and even like Rocky Romero, who I think mostly just stuck to his usual stuff, which hasn't really been thrilling us, got a good reaction. And I think that's in part because Jack Evans looks great when he makes everything you do look like it's killing him. All the double teams you said I thought were great. Strong and Evans continue to really develop good chemistry. And I think one of the things that makes Evans and Strong great is so many wrestlers these days, they're like super well-rounded, but in some ways that makes them less interesting. Like I feel like if you took every style and every attribute wrestlers could have, most wrestlers nowadays focus on being like a 7 or 8 out of 10 at almost everything, where I feel like more wrestlers in this era, and especially a guy like Jack Evans, it's like Jack Evans is a 10 out of 10 on some attributes, and he's like a 3 out of 10 on others. And I think
10 out of 10 on looks.
Yeah, definitely, as we've proven, the most handsome member of Generation Next. We did the science and figured that out. But
he should have gotten the Sean Spears push.
But also, like, great high flyer, great bumper, stuff like that. But also, doesn't have, he's not the kind of guy where he could realistically do a big brawl or do power moves or stuff like that, or even do a lot of really intricate mat wrestling. But the great thing about the Strong Evans tag team is it feels like every one of Jack Evans' strengths is one of Roderick Strong's weaknesses, and vice versa. And that's what makes them great. It's like a team where they just complement each other. They slot into each other's gaps so well. You know, it's great. And I feel like now that wrestlers are more well-rounded, we're seeing fewer and fewer teams like that than we did in this era. And I really like teams like that. So anyway, just a really fun match. My two flaws, Matt, my two big flaws in this match were there's one point where Roderick Strong gets the hot tag to Jack Evans where he does something I hate, which is after he gets beaten down for a fairly extended period of time, he just kind of, while the guy has him in a headlock, just bull rushes his corner and makes a tag. Like, he doesn't really make a comeback. He just is like, well, it's time to make a hot tag, and he does it. And I hate when you really get beaten up for a while. You should have something more dramatic than that. And the other thing I've complained about that they do in this match again is they do probably the most impressive spot on the entire show, and the most impressive spot they can do, which is the old Ode to the Bulldogs, where Strong has an opponent in the torture rack. Jack Evans jumps on the guy while he's in the torture rack and then does like a flipping spot. Sometimes he would do different kinds of spots. Sometimes a moonsault, sometimes even like a Phoenix splash off the guy onto the other opponent who's lying on the mat. And they just do it in the middle of the match for a near fall. And it's not even like one of the final near falls. And in fact, I think in this match, Matt, like it felt like seconds later, the Rottweilers were back in control and doing like a Doomsday Bulldog. Like,
yes, it was seconds later. Yes.
Yeah. It's insane that they just like, that they don't realize, like, every time they do that spot, it gets the biggest reaction of the whole match. Like, they don't realize that this should be this is a match they won. They very easily could have made this the finish. Like, it just feels like, guys, like, you got gold here. It's almost like you don't even know that you've got gold right here.
Yeah, I guess they wanted to do something more convoluted with the legal man controversy and Homicide shoving Roderick out of the ring. But yes, you're right. It should have either been the finish or like just right before the finish.
Yeah, or the near fall. Yeah, right before the finish. Yeah. But other than those comments, I mean, still fun, all action match. And I agree with you when you say basically in a weird way, the best Havana Pitbulls match is the one that only has had half the Havana Pitbulls in it, because honestly, and this is nothing against Ricky Reyes, this is more in favor of Homicide. It's just you put Homicide in there, it makes a world of difference.
But they are going to, I think on the very next show, there's going to be a Havana Pitbulls versus Strong and Evans match for the tag team titles, so it'll be interesting to compare the two.
Definitely. And yeah, this match, very simple, logical booking where they earn a title shot because they beat half of the tag champs, so in a tag match. So
and Strong and Romero, even though he's a heel, is just like, all right, motherfucker, you got your shot. Like, that's basically what he says. So
yeah.
You know, even the Rottweilers are people of honor.
Yeah, so right after the match, Homicide gets on the mic. He tells them to give Generation Next a hand. They deserve it. Homicide then says, a lot of people think the Rottweilers are bad guys, but they believe in the code of honor. Homicide then asks for handshakes, and I thought Generation Next looked a little bit like goobers actually believing him, because they go for handshakes and they, of course, immediately get attacked.
I think it's okay for those two guys to look like goobers, though. Like, in their roles in the promotion at this point.
Yeah, you got a point. Jack Evans gets hit with the cop killer. He sells it again. Great selling. If you watch how he takes the cop killer, his body goes rigid for a second, and then he lets it go limp. Like, it's just great physical selling of the cop killer. Romero sends a quick shout to his man, Jay Smokes. Again, Julius Smokes was not on this double shot in the Midwest. As Roderick carries Jack to the back, Rocky Romero on the mic, like Matt says, you want your title shot? You got your fucking title shot. And simple as that. Got to build to the next show. Homicide says, Chicago, I fucking hate you all. Thank you very much. And then he asks the fans to kiss their asses. And
doesn't he say kiss our Puerto Rican asses? Even though, as far as I know, Rocky Romero is not Puerto Rican.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I heard that or not. And I mean, all I know is at the end, Matt, the crowd chants, fuck you. So they finally managed to get some heel heat on a night, like you said, where, you know, the fans are into both these teams, even though they're both heel teams. Semi-main event, I Quit match. Alex Shelley defeated Jimmy Jacobs in 16 minutes, 47 seconds when he made Jacobs say, I quit in the Border City stretch. I thought this was this was good. This was like a 3.5 star match. I didn't quite like it. It was a little bit under the last match for me. I felt like the effort was better than the match. I felt like Jimmy Jacobs was giving like a 10 out of 10 effort. Like he was treating this match like this was a big match for his career. And while I don't think Alex Shelley was slacking in any way, I felt like he was just giving like a regular Alex Shelley performance. But I felt like Jimmy Jacobs, he was taking a lot of punishment. He was bumping big. When he fired up, whenever it was his time for a comeback in this match, he had this real fury where Alex Shelley didn't really have that emotion. Although I guess you could argue that could be part of the story, because the whole story of this match is Alex Shelley keeps beating Jimmy Jacobs and Jimmy Jacobs keeps chasing Alex Shelley. So I guess you could say, well, Alex Shelley's over it and Jimmy Jacobs really has a chip on his shoulder about this. But anyway, the match is one of those I Quit matches that is more of a hardcore match than a like submission match. It's a lot of weapons. Jimmy Jacobs pulls out a spike, and the spike gets used against him. He bleeds. He ends up pulling a second spike at one point from his boots to free himself when he's duct taped to the ring post. There's a kendo stick gets used. All sorts of stuff like that. Lots of Jacobs takes a cross-legged brainbuster on a chair laid between two open chairs. So I guess one of my problems with this match, other than that maybe difference in intensity, was it's an I Quit match where a lot of the I Quit moments weren't like submissions. It was more a guy hits a big spot, like maybe even a spot you'd see in a regular match of theirs, and then the ref just asks, "Do you quit?" And I feel like there's no excitement in that, because in an I Quit match, it's going to be a big spot that ends it. Like, Jimmy Jacobs is not just going to take like the shell shock out of nowhere and go, yeah, I quit. I can't take this anymore. Like, but yet, and when in a match, you might buy some of those spots as near falls, and there's this tension and excitement of going 1, 2, and you're, waiting to see, where there was way fewer of those spots. I feel like this match took a lot of spots that could have been good near falls in a pin and turn them into just anticlimactic spots where he's not going to say I quit after he takes, I don't know, whatever this is, a kendo stick shot to the head. But still, if you like big crazy spots, I'm sure you've got some to mention. Like, I know I thought there was a really cool spot where Jimmy Jacobs takes the shell shock like into the guardrail, the barrier sign. I thought that was cool. Like I mentioned, all the weapon spots. There are cool spots. There's violence. I thought Jimmy Jacobs worked really hard. I just felt like, again, like the match was a little less than the effort that went into it.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say I liked the match a pretty decent amount more than you. I thought it was a great match. 4-star range. And I thought particularly impressive what these guys are like, 20, 21 at this point. And so I don't. When you mentioned the I Quit thing, when you think of the famous I Quit matches in history, aren't they mostly like this? Like in terms of brawls, like it's not like Magnum TA and Tully Blanchard were like submission specialists, right? The Funk versus Flair match. They, obviously Flair won with the figure 4, but it was mostly an all-out brawl. Mick Foley and The Rock. So I think this was in a tradition of I Quit matches, where it's like you're beating your opponent into submission rather than trying to work them into submission, if that makes sense. But I definitely agree with you about Jacobs. Like he was really like, okay, this is a semi-main event singles match with a storyline that I got in ROH. This is a guy who's never even gotten promo time. So that's a pretty big moment for Jimmy Jacobs. And I think he really makes the most of it. And you're right, they do have a lot of really cool spots. Like very early in the match, Shelley is on the receiving end, right, of Jacobs. Jacobs is throwing chairs into the ring. He's throwing Shelley all over into the guardrail, and then Shelley out of nowhere hits that shell shock onto Jacobs into the barricade, and that's when he takes over. And then after he leg sweeps Jimmy Jacobs into the barricade, he yells something first, and it sounded to me like he yelled Frito-Lay, but I don't think that's what he yelled, because as much as I'm sure he loves those chips, I don't think he said that in the middle of his big match.
No, you know what he screamed? I think he screamed TNA, because I remember at this time a lot of fans were always getting on him with the baby bear chants and like go back to TNA chants. And he actually, I think, screams TNA. And just before you go back, later on, did you notice there's a moment where this was such a snarky fan comment that made me cringe. But Shelley grabs a kendo stick, and this is where he duct tapes Jacobs to the ring, the turnbuckle, so he can hit him with the kendo stick. And you can hear a snarky fan. I don't know if you noticed this. You can hear a fan yell very clearly, "Now, would TNA ever do something like this?"
Oh, yes.
No!
I wrote that down.
Yeah. So I think he was just basically responding to fans really getting on him because he's in TNA.
Well, I hope that one day ROH fans do a "fuck Frito-Lay" chant. We like Utz or Y, I don't know, whatever the biggest competitor is. Wise, I don't know. Pringles. Anyway.
I just want a sound clip of just you enthusiastically blurting out Pringles that I could put on a soundboard.
Well, if you listen to an old Justin Shapiro show, I do have a song called "All the Pringle Ladies."
Oh, yeah, so. You do. This isn't even the first time you've mentioned Pringles.
Nope. Pop, 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 pop. Okay, never mind. Well, I'm glad I got to sing that. So anyway, this match. The one complaint I do have about the early parts of the match where they're on the floor, they stayed in like one corner of the ringside area, and I feel like it probably would have been nice for the rest of the crowd if they had moved around a little bit when they did all these spots. But I guess it's a small thing as someone watching on DVD who can see everything. But yeah, there are definitely cool spots. Early on, Shelley does his like skull fuck move into driving Jacobs' head repeatedly into a chair. And to me, that feels like it could be a finish, where you repeatedly knock someone's head into a chair. That doesn't seem like a mid-match transition move to me. Even more so than Ode to the Bulldogs, right? Like, that just seems like the end of a match, like repeatedly hitting someone in the head with a chair, but whatever. Jacobs pulls out the spike, which would become one of his signatures in brawls. And I really like that because it was, like, surprising. And, and they do some good spots where Shelley is avoiding getting hit by the spike. And then he just gets to hit Jacobs himself. And like you talked about the difference between intensity of these two guys. And maybe it was intentional, maybe it wasn't, but I thought it worked because you're right. Shelley is dominant over Jacobs. Like he beats him all the time. He's a much higher position on the card. He just finds Jacobs to be a pest. And Jacobs is like doing everything he can to destroy Shelley. And Shelley is just like, nope. And I'm destroying you. And so at one point he has like the kendo stick and the spike, and he spikes him with one hand, kendo sticks him with the other hand, spikes him with one hand, kendo sticks him with the other hand. And of course we get a Ring of Hardcore reference from all this. Which, I guess this is more what Foley would be talking about than a random Moff and Whitmer hit somebody in the with a chair 100 times match, right? At least this has a story. I think my favorite spot of the match was actually when Jacobs goes for the Contra Code onto a chair, but Shelley grabs him and reverses it into a tombstone through this chair that's already set up. I think that's a really cool spot. You don't really see that too often, and it was really well executed. So I definitely enjoyed that. And Shelley just wore out Jimmy's back with the kendo stick while he's taped up. You mentioned he tapes him up in the turnbuckle. He really brutally wears him out. And at this point, you mentioned that somebody yelled, "I wonder if TNA will let you do that." But at this point, Jimmy Jacobs is just getting the tar beat out of him with a kendo stick, and a fan just goes, "Wear your purple boots." And I'm just like, I wonder if someone yelled that at Magnum TA while he was sticking a spike in Tully Blanchard's eyes. It was just such random timing. So I guess you could argue that if that fan is so unengaged in the storyline, then maybe they weren't succeeding as much as I thought they were. But it felt like they were mostly. But eventually, Jimmy does fight out of the Border City stretch the first time. He keeps his hand up. He at one point does a camel clutch with the assistance of the kendo stick, but Shelley won't give up. So they do a few submission spots. Jacobs hits an unprettier. Then he goes to the senton off the top. Then cracks Shelley over the head with the stick and puts the Border City stretch on Shelley, and I thought that was really cool. Then he set up 2 chairs. He laid a third one over them, and he went for the Contra Code, but Shelley blocked it. Caned Jimmy Jacobs, then he hit that cross-legged brainbuster that you mentioned. I think he calls it came from Japan too, on the chairs. Then he did the Border City stretch, and Shelley's screaming that Jimmy quits, Jimmy finally does. Jimmy's emotion during all this was just fantastic. And like you said, Shelley is just much more like frustrated and arrogant during the whole time. But Shelley pulls it out. I thought it was just an extremely well laid out match, especially when you're talking about two very young guys. Yeah, I just thought they did a really great job putting that match together. And I thought the execution was good. I can't think of any like botches or anything. And I found that the difference in their intensity was more of a feature to the storyline than it was a bug, at least for me.
Something you mentioned too that I was thinking about was you mentioned that purple boots comment. This was a really interesting point in Jimmy Jacobs' Ring of Honor career, because it's like a transition point, because you can hear on commentary Gabe for the last couple shows keeps going, Jacobs is moving away from the Huss stuff. But it's funny because if you watch this match, like the crowd is still hussing a lot.
He's never done a promo or presented himself as a different character.
Yeah, and it's never been an official thing. It just starts happening. And, Gabe also tries to sell that, Ricky Steamboat's taking him under his wing, which is, again, something that's not really shown, like, in storyline, like in a promo. It's just we're told by Gabe this is what's happening. But it feels weird because, and we've talked about this before, like when you see guys like Orange Cassidy or all sorts of wrestlers nowadays, or Joey Ryan, who it's weird to bring him up because he's a horrible person, but like, it feels like nowadays in the modern era, a wrestler could do like what would be considered a fringe or a comedy character and really go far in wrestling. Where back in Jimmy Jacobs, the Huss days, that gimmick was always more over than it was positioned as. And yet it was always Gabe on commentary saying like, if he's going to have to get serious, and I feel like this is a transition point where he's being more serious, but the crowd still wants to see Huss. And as I think we'll see as the months keep on going, losing the Huss gimmick without really replacing it with much actually hurts him to the point where he's almost out of the company until he comes up with the Jimmy Loves Lacey storyline. Like it was kind of like they took something away with him without giving him something back.
This was probably Jimmy Jacobs' biggest singles match in ROH, probably until the BJ Whitmer feud in like 2007.
Yeah. And but I think even if we both liked the match, obviously you liked it more than me, but I think we can both agree this is probably I think this is the best Jimmy Jacobs performance in Ring of Honor up to this point, like by far.
Yeah, well, like you said, it's his first opportunity of having a real major singles match, also, and he delivers in that position.
And so that brings us finally to the main event. And boy, is it a main event with lots to talk about. The Ring of Honor World Title match, Samoa Joe and CM Punk went to a time limit draw. Yes, not a repeat, a second time, 60-minute time limit draw. Matt?
I should mention before we get too into this, the end of that last thing with the Foley thing with where the Carnage crew come out.
I forgot to mention that, Matt. Thank you so much. I can go through that. I completely missed that. Thank God for you, Matt.
Again, the only time anyone's ever said that.
After the match, Shelley grabs the mic. Shelley says for a year and a half, Jacobs has just kept coming back, and he's sick of Jacobs' shit. Shelley says he's going to make Jimmy wish that he died in his sleep last night, which is pretty harsh. Shelley grabs the candlestick, and he tells Jimmy to say his fucking prayers. Roderick Strong joins in on the beatdown until Ricky Steamboat chases them away. The Carnage crew then run in, and they beat up Steamboat as the crowd chants for Foley. The beatdown continues until Moff, Whitmer, and Foley all run in. Foley dishes out the mandible claw, double arm DDT, and a chair shot to save Steamboat. Mick gets on the mic and he tells Steamboat that hardcore wrestling just saved his ass. And Matt, what is the score that Mick Foley quotes to him?
Pure Wrestling 1, Hardcore Wrestling 1.
All tied up.
Which doesn't make any sense because this wasn't a match. Hardcore Wrestling didn't win. But hey, whatever. We're making our own rules. It's fine. No goose eggs involved.
So that brings us to the world title match. Matt, I thought this match is one of the we'll talk about why, one of the most important matches in Ring of Honor history up to this point, and probably one of the most important of just the entire Sapolsky era that goes up to late 2008.
The only ROH match up to this point that was even close in importance would be the main event of the very first ROH show. It's other than that, like this blows everything else away in terms of importance.
So I thought we'd kind of do this into three parts, which is first, I can give a little background on the match, then we can talk about the match, and then we can kind of do what it's almost a separate story, which is the reaction this match got and what it meant to the company. And I have more material on this one match than I think we've had for any match in a long time, maybe ever. Like, it's not quite Feinstein show material level, thank God, but there was a lot written about this match. And also from my notes, I should bring up, just like the match, the first 1 hour draw that we covered in Dayton at the World Title Classic, I didn't transcribe word for word, but I recapped from my notes when their segment talking about this match in the CM Punk Samoa Joe straight shoot interview, which continues to be, I think I plugged on the last time, it's one of the best shoot interviews if you're a fan of this era. I don't think two wrestlers have ever done quite as good a job of going into detail on specific matches. Talking about it to you privately, you brought up the good point of, I don't know how many times guys have had a shoot interview where they talked about a match like this. It wasn't very long after these three matches where they actually did the shoot interview, so it was fresh in their minds. But I would normally feel bad about using like such detailed descriptions of what they said in a shoot interview in the notes for like, because I recap a lot of it. But I would say in this case, I don't feel bad because this is a DVD, like most of Ring of Honor stuff of this era. It's out of print, so you can't legally buy this anywhere. You have to go on eBay or find a torrent. This
is a guilt-free situation, Trevor.
Yeah.
Do not feel bad.
Yeah, this is a situation where the gray market is the only market for this. So if you want to buy this legally, you literally can't right now. So anyway, I thought I'd go into the history. So this match, Matt, one of the amazing things about this match is it was never supposed to happen. Well, in a way it was, but in a way it wasn't, because as we talked about on the last show, this weekend, it was the big selling point of this weekend, the double shot of ROH Gold and Joe versus Punk 2, before it was called that, was supposed to be, it was Steve Corino's return to in-ring Ring of Honor, wrestling in matches for the first time in like a year. He was going to be in the six-man main event on the last night. Jimmy Jacobs replaced him, and he was supposed to be Samoa Joe in the main event of this match. And as we talked about in the last episode 50 of Through the Years, Corino, because 0-1, his home promotion, had so many injuries, they said, Steve, we have to pull you off these shows. You can't book yourself out. We need you back in Japan for 0-1. He wrote a big public apology. So this match wasn't supposed to happen. And I did some research, and through the shoot interview, I don't think they never explicitly say this, but this was never supposed to be a trilogy of matches, I think. This was during the Punk Joe shoot interview where they talk about this stuff, the shoot interviewer, who isn't gay but someone else, he actually tells them, like, the rematch to your match in Dayton was supposed to happen on December 4th, which is when their third match happens, which is All-Star Extravaganza 2. And during the shoot interview, when Punk and Joe hear this, they're both surprised. They did not know that was the plan. They didn't know until the shoot interviewer tells them. But what they describe in the shoot interview is, they say after the Joe Punk match at World Title Classic, they sat down with Gabe Sapolsky and they decided, where are we going to go with this feud? And they say the three of them agreed that they were going to hold off on doing a rematch as long as possible. That their goal was to tease this out until, they said, like, the fans were just begging to see the rematch. And so Joe and Punk both say on this shoot interview, they were pissed when Corino canceled on short notice, because then Gabe at that point calls them up. I think they said something like 5 days or something before the show, something like that, and says to them, like, I want to do Punk Joe too, because I guess Gabe, they don't say this in the shoot, but I think it stands to reason that Gabe's doing the old Booker thing, which is if you have to remove a major match from a show, you give the fans something even better, because you don't want fans to start feeling like that they're not going to get what they promised. So you want to condition them into expecting that if a major match gets canceled, we're actually going to give you better than what you were promised. And Joe and Punk in the shoot say they were mad. Like, they said they wrote angry emails to their friend Corino about having to cancel. They fought against Gabe doing this match. They felt like, no, we wanted to hold this off way longer, and you won't Joe in the shoot says, I understand Gabe's point about not wanting this new big market Chicago to take a hit, but he was like, I thought, Gabe, can't we let them take the hit just this one time and we'll make it up to them?
Yeah, Joe, definitely not the promoter right there.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And but to their credit, Joe says we eventually realized, look, we're wrestlers. We're paid to do at the end of the day what the booker tells us to do. And they said so over those 5 days, we got ourselves in the mindset to try and match what we did on the last show. So Matt, before we get into did they match or top what they did on the show before, um, the one other note that's really interesting and actually pertains to the last show, but I saved it for this show, which is they talk about in the shoot interview um, how bad Joe and Punk were both hurt going to this match. The words they used to describe this match was they said everything that could go against this match was going against it because first you have the booking being screwed up. This isn't even the time they wanted this match. They had no build, no plan to even get into the cardio. And then the shoot, Punk and Joe, they talk about Joe says he hurt his leg a couple weeks earlier in New York, and he says his leg was shot on this weekend. Punk says Joe stayed with him, and it was so swollen it was like a pumpkin. Joe says after the Rocky Romero match the night before in Dayton, his leg was so swollen it took him an hour to get his kick pad off backstage. He says CM Punk and Homicide both had to help him take it off. He says he nearly cried during it. It hurt so much. And Joe also points out that Homicide was laughing the whole time, which sounds like a Homicide thing. Joe says they then drove all night to Chicago to stay at Ace Steele's house. And he says when they went to sleep, by the time he woke up, his leg had blown back up again. Meanwhile, Punk knows that he had worked 2 matches the night before at Ring of Honor Gold. He says neither match was easy to work. And then he says they were both so hurt that they planned this match with Punk laying on his stomach with ice on his back and Joe laying on his back with their heads like just mere inches or feet away from each other. And then Gabe, they said, was coming in every 5 minutes asking them how it was going in classic panicked Gabe style. Joe says Mick Foley came in at one point and he saw Joe's leg and he said, quote, "Good God, you're going to wrestle tonight?" And Joe just was like, "Yep, I don't want to, but I'm going to wrestle tonight." And Punk says his injuries, if you watch the match, and I did notice this, he has like a weird big bandage on his back that he pulls off very early. And Punk says that was like a Ben Gay medicated patch on his back. And I think he says something like, "I don't know why I thought that would stay on my back." And then finally, Matt, the last little note before the match, Punk says Gabe was super nervous about the second match. Punk says when his music started before the match, he looked at Joe backstage with Gabe watching and said, "My mind's gone blank. We should just listen to the crowd and wing it." And Gabe says it had a look of horror on his face. Joe then says Gabe looked at him and trying to figure out if Punk was joking or not. Joe just looked at Gabe too and said, "I'm kind of in the same boat. I don't know what we're going to do." And then they just went out and wrestled the match.
I don't know if I don't know if that's all true, but if it's not, that's some damn good folklore.
The way they talk, you can't quite tell if they're fucking with Gabe or if that was really their mindset. Either way, I can believe the part about Gabe being panicked, but like I kept trying to interpret their tone, but I can't tell if I believe that they said that stuff. I don't believe if they really meant it or they just because you can tell listening to the shoot interview, they clearly through multiple points in the show, like in the shoot, relish like ribbing Gabe whenever they can. So I have no idea, like, are they screwing with Gabe or did they really like run out of ideas? Although I will say Punk and Joe both say 80% of this match was improvised on the fly. It was 20% ideas thought of before the match started and then 80% spur of the moment things.
Well, it seems like it would be really difficult to memorize an hour's worth of stuff, but who knows?
Yeah. Matt, finally, after all that preamble, I'm letting you take first shot at this. Big match. What'd you think about this match?
All right, so I don't know. Do you think I should go into play-by-play, or do you think I should give the big picture first?
Whatever you want.
I would say it starts as not quite a Money in the Bank atmosphere for Punk at the beginning, but it's a pretty damn good atmosphere. He gets way more streamers than Joe, although Joe definitely has his fans in the crowd, including one very vocal one that you could hear late in the show. But Punk is definitely the babyface. But the atmosphere is great. Like, just a great atmosphere the entire time from minute 1 to minute 60. Phenomenal. I thought this was Mark Nolte's probably his best performance, wouldn't you say?
Yes, I think especially even I would go far as to say the Gabe Nolte team, this is the best we've ever heard. Like, I thought they worked good it was definitely Nolte's best performance, but I thought Gabe and Nolte actually worked good as a team on this match.
Yeah, Nolte helped me understand certain like plot points, so to speak, storylines that I wouldn't have maybe thought of. But one thing I really liked is like how they like as you would expect, they really did a good job playing off the first match. Because if you remember the first match, the storyline early was that Punk was going to rope-a-dope Joe. Like he was going to get Joe to punch himself out. And I remember in our original review, you had mentioned that that match, you remember there being a lot of headlocks. And they did a lot of headlocks, but there wasn't as many as you thought.
Yeah.
You were thinking of this match.
Yeah, like this match, they doubled down on the headlocks. They kind of abandoned the rope-a-dope. They even mentioned that on commentary.
They did, yes.
But then it's like Punk's strategy this time is like, all right, rope-a-dope didn't work so much, headlocks did, double down on the headlocks.
Right, so he does a lot of headlocks early. And like the storyline in the first part of the match is more like Punk is frustrating Joe. Because like Joe just can't get anything going on him. Like Punk will just go back to that side headlock, really take him out with the side headlock. This is just one side thing I noticed. You know how like when Gabe does the plugging of the website and stuff and the DVDs, he goes, "Artie's in my earpiece."
Yeah.
So whenever he says that, I always can't help but just picture Arnie Pie even though he says Arnie Pie from The Simpsons, Arnie in the sky. That's so because he's on a headset also. So I just imagine Arnie Pie telling Gabe, you gotta plug the DVDs. I don't know. Whatever. I know that's a weird timing for that comment, but okay. So Joe is obviously very very frustrated by all of the headlocks, and he shows it. And I like he's kicking the guardrail. Stuff like that. So Punk continues to have Joe's number, and they're really working the side headlock for a long time, and the point where the crowd is popping for each headlock takeover. So you have a crowd going when the crowd pops for your headlock takeovers, because that's such a common and not major move. So early on they're doing a lot of backing into the corner with clean breaks, but now as Joe gets frustrated, he backs Punk into the corner and he just chops the crap out of him. But then Punk gets another headlock, so even the Joe's strikes aren't really holding down Punk. So Joe does a back suplex on Punk while in the headlock, but Punk holds on to the headlock. All these headlock spots are great. And at this point, that's when Nolte notes, like, Punk, he's not doing the rope-a-dope. He's, instead of allowing himself to get beaten up by Joe, he's just going to keep Joe grounded. And it seems to be working pretty well. They do a spot where Joe challenges Punk to hit the ropes and knock him down. And, Punk does it, and Joe, stays put. He shoves him. Punk does it again, and the third time, Punk teases it, but instead he just goes to hit Joe, and Joe avoids it and hits Punk, and they do this, like, cool series of reversals, ending with a roll-up. And to the point where Joe actually goes out to the floor for a breather, which you never see Samoa Joe do. So, like, a lot of, like, frustration from Samoa Joe, and it's just really, really credible. And it really, it works. They even do a few tests of strength, and Joe's headbutting him while in the knuckle lock, and then they follow up with, like, a slap fest. But Punk actually gets the better of the slapfest for a little while, but then Joe ends that with just like a big kick to the head, and he knocks Punk to the floor, and that's kind of like the first time that Punk has a clear disadvantage, and we're talking like 20 minutes into the match at this point. So one thing I'm noticing about the early part of the match is, even though they're starting slow, starting basic, they're not messing around. It's very to the point. It's all in service of winning the match. There's no fooling around with the fans, which, if you remember, that happened in the first 20 minutes of the first match. It's all business, but the crowd is just as with it, if not more so. So Punk is, Joe's working over Punk's shoulder. Punk is working over Joe's shoulder with boots, and he slams Joe's arm into the mat, and he actually knocks Joe down with a chop, which I don't know. You wouldn't expect CM Punk to knock down Samoa Joe with a chop, but I guess it just goes to show how much Punk has worn Joe down. And Punk actually does the rope walk spot, where he does the Undertaker style rope walk, but then he comes down with like a leg drop on Joe's shoulder. And Gabe notes that Punk hadn't done that since the Cabana matches in 2002. But it actually makes a lot of sense here, because like Punk's been working on Joe's, he's doing the chin lock, so he's working on the neck and the shoulder. So it makes a lot of sense. And he keeps arm dragging Joe, and Nolte notes that Steamboat must have worked with him on the arm drag. I would have loved some skits like that, with Steamboat teaching Punk how to do an arm drag. But I don't think that Punk was thinking that when he did this. I think it was just like that's sort of like a retroactive continuity thing. So Punk doesn't allow Joe to get much momentum. He keeps taking Joe down. We're getting close to like half hour point, and we're still doing the side headlock thing. Joe takes Punk to the floor while he's in the headlock, and Punk holds on even to the floor. So Joe back suplexes him on the floor. And like that's a clever spot, I thought, because it finally you're starting to see the momentum turn around a little bit, like close to halfway through the match. And then back in the ring, there's a cool spot because earlier in the match, Joe went for his like, you know how Joe does the snap mare into a kick into the knee. So the first time Joe did it, Punk blocked it. But now after taking that suplex on the floor, Punk doesn't block it, and Joe he tries, but Joe won't let him, and he gets him down. And then but Punk is not out yet because Joe is coming on with his face wash, but Punk moves out of the way from the running boot, and then Punk does his own. So Punk still is back in control. Punk gets like a cover on Joe, and Joe gets his foot on the ropes, and Nolte says, I don't know if that would have helped. That would have kept Joe down anyway, which is really my only complaint about Mark Nolte during this entire match. Just another one of those, yeah, this wrestler isn't doing a good enough job. Like another one of those kind of like unnecessary comments.
Yeah.
But very minor complaint. So Joe gets the STF on Punk, and Gabe notes that Romero lost to that last night. But and I know that Joe actually mentioned this in the shoot interview. Joe like turns it into this like weird stretch move. So basically, Joe has the STF on Punk, but then he like pulls Punk up while Joe is still on his knees. And Joe basically like bends Punk back in the other direction while his legs are still locked, like almost putting Punk into like a bridging position. Joe can't hold it for long, but it gets a really big pop, and it's a really cool spot that you've never seen before. And it makes sense that you've never seen it before because Joe literally says he just made that move up, like right on the spot, which you can sort of tell, like it's not a real move, but it worked pretty well, especially now that you know the backstory that CM Punk had a bad back and, all that stuff. Nolte says, of all the matches CM Punk has had, this could be his best. And Gabe says, the same could be said for Samoa Joe. The same could be said for ROH history. Now, it's funny here because like I actually thought Nolte's comment was good because the story of the match is how well Punk is doing at this point. But I thought Gabe jumped the gun on saying this is the best in ROH history. It was like to me it was too early in the match for a statement like that. Like it hadn't reached that level yet. Like it was a really good match, but you still have a half hour to go. And I don't know. That's like almost one of those like Gabe where he knows that someone is injured. It's like he knew the match would be epic before it was. I mean, small but noticeable.
Psychic Gabe back again. He just knows what's going to happen. It's almost as if this show was already happened, and he's commentating over a tape.
Exactly. Joe does his spot, which I love, where Punk goes for a crossbody, and Joe just kind of like casually walks away and stares at the crowd. He doesn't like move out of the way like in a dramatic way. He just sort of like kind of like just saunters out of the way. And Joe gets actually a really big chant for that one. Probably one of his biggest chants of the match, honestly. Joe does a really long delayed vertical suplex. So like you could see these guys like doing these moves that they don't normally do. I don't remember seeing Joe hit like a delayed vertical before. Do you?
No, not really. In fact, if anything, Punk is the guy that would occasionally do that.
Yeah, I don't think he was doing that one on Joe though.
Yeah, no.
So now Joe really has the momentum. Like Punk is coming back with chops, a drop kick, and Joe just hits a leg sweep to cut him off. He does a Boston Crab, and Punk goes for the roast, but Joe sits back, but Punk makes it. Joe actually does these corner buckle whips, like almost like he's whipping Bret Hart into the turnbuckle face first. But what Joe does, like to really make it like an oomph on it, he drops down every time he whips him. Like he drops down like face first onto the mat, which I thought was a really good touch. Like he's just like that power that he does. I really enjoy that. So at this point, Joe is so dominant that Nolte wonders if the ref might start the match. And I thought it was cool, like how like Punk had been in control for so long, and Joe just his dominance like was only a few minutes at this point, but it was so dominant that Nolte's like, I think we got to stop this match, and it actually made sense. So Joe now he hits his face wash and running boot combo without Punk escaping, so you could really see that Punk is Punk is kind of losing here. Punk tries to fight back, but there's nothing behind the strikes. But he does come out of nowhere with like a head scissors off the middle rope and a tope to the floor. And he actually goes for the ole ole kick and hits it. And then he goes for another kick and he hits it right in front of Dr. Keith. And Joe's eyes are just like rolling into the back of his head, which shades of the end of Reborn Stage 2, where they're in the bathroom. If you remember that spot at all.
Yeah. Yeah. When oh God, that was such. It worked this time. It was the corniest thing ever in that backstage segment.
No, it definitely worked here. And so this is one of the big spots of the match now. So if you remember in the first match, Punk went for a Rana off the apron. So now Joe catches him, swings him into the guardrail, and he is pissed off. And he hits the ole ole kick. But Punk actually cuts him off. They have like a strike battle on the floor, again in front of Dr. Keith. And Punk is fired up because Dr. Keith is giving him all of his energy. But Joe gets the better of it, and then he hits the ole ole kick really hard. And that was a great sequence. And Joe is just so intense here. Even though it's an hour-long match, even though they have 20 more minutes to drag this out, Joe doesn't even go for a second ole ole kick. That's how into what they're doing. They're not even like, okay, let's do it again. Give it a couple extra minutes. He's like, no, I'm pissed. I'm furious. We're going to get back into the ring. And Punk actually head scissors Joe into the buckle and charges at him, but Joe hits that ST Joe move for 2. And the crowd actually at the 40-minute mark actually buys that as a near fall. I don't think Joe's ever won with that move, but the crowd actually popped. Then Joe hits the elbow suicida, and this is when Gabe goes, Mark, I can't take it anymore. The atmosphere is incredible. Let's go into the crowd. You got to be a fan for something like this. And Nolte's like, you're right. This match speaks for itself. So nice to be able to just quit your job before the end to be a fan. But there is no commentary for the rest of the match, so that is one less thing for me to comment on. Yeah.
The final 18 minutes, and I said to you in the notes, we were talking, ironically, I would say the best performance these two have had together is the one that they say 18 minutes left. Yeah, let's not do this anymore. It's just, I don't know.
Yeah, it was fine. I'm not saying I necessarily missed the commentary so much, but they probably could have added something if they had been as good as they were for the first 42 minutes. So that's a compliment, Gabe. I'm saying you did a good job.
Yeah.
But, so now all of this is done with no commentary. So Joe goes to suplex Punk on the apron, but Punk fights him off, so Joe just DDTs him on the apron. Then Punk goes for a Shining Wizard back in the ring, but Joe cuts him off with a spear. And according to the shoot interview, right, Punk actually just called for that spear right before, and Joe's thinking I've never hit a spear in my life. But he hits it, and it was a good spear.
Yeah, it is shockingly good for a guy that not just has never done one before, but did not know they were doing one probably till 5 seconds before they did.
Yeah, I guess it's not that complicated a move, but still, I've seen bad ones, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So Punk moves out of the way of a Joe top rope splash, and both guys are down. And then they get to their knees, and they're trading strikes, and Joe is up to his feet first and goes for a pile driver, but Punk escapes, hits a mule kick and an enziguri, because you just can't keep CM Punk down in Chicago. He hits 6 thigh-slapping mule kicks and runs at Joe, but Joe hits that snap powerbomb for 2 and turns it into the cross arm breaker. But Punk makes the ropes. And at this point, for the rest of the match, pretty much everyone in the crowd is on their feet. They are so into all this. Punk puts Joe on the top rope and hits a neck breaker on him for a 2 count. Joe escapes a swinging DDT, but Punk tries again and hits it for a 2 count. Punk gets on what I think was the Anaconda Vice, wasn't it? I think the first time he did that in ROH, and Joe got to the ropes.
I think so.
Yeah, so debut of the Anaconda Vice. That's a little-known fact about this match. Punk yells, Brainbuster, and goes for one, but Joe blocks it and knees him, and then Joe powers Punk over. But Punk escapes, but then Joe hits a big lariat for 2. And this is when you could start hearing this Joe superfan. It's a guy in the crowd who just keeps yelling to Joe, specifically saying Joe's name a lot. Watch it, Joe! He says, at one point he's like, Joe, get the belly to belly. It's just I believe in the shoot interview, the Joe and Punk called him Smokes' his granddaddy. That's their words, not mine. They do say that though. And he's very entertaining. I wonder if that guy knows how audible he is in this famous match. But so Joe hits a fireman's carry into a stomach breaker, then a brain buster. So at this point, they're just hitting big moves, like with desperation. And Joe goes for another lariat, but Punk avoids it, hits like an arm trap DDT for 2, and gets an ROH chant for some reason. I think the crowd's just so enthralled. Punk goes for the Pepsi twist, but Joe avoids it, hits a power bomb into another STF. He turns that into the crossface, but Punk gets his foot on the ropes. The crowd bought that as a possible finish also. Joe goes for the dragon suplex, but Punk fights out, kicks Joe in the knee. He hits a sunset flip and gets 2. And then he immediately hits the Shining Wizard for 2, which I thought was a really good sequence. He does a Pepsi twist, then a moonsault for 2. All of the 2 counts are, by the way, getting like enormous pops here. Joe comes Joe comes 2, hits a series of slaps and this like hard to explain suplex where he grabs Punk's and then he grabs Punk's arm, goes for another lariat, but Punk like jumps on his back and locks in a sleeper hold, and the crowd's chanting tap, 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 but Joe hits a Saito suplex style move and gets out of it. But Punk does like a fighting spirit stand-up, power-up move, and they both clothesline each other, and they're both down. And I gotta take a breath. So the crowd counts along, and Punk gets up around 8. Punk goes up to the top for the Pepsi plunge, and this is probably the best part of the whole match. There's just this epic struggle at the top where Punk is going for the Pepsi plunge. Joe fights off. Punk gets it again. Joe fights it off. Punk gets it again, but Joe fights it off, and eventually Joe hits a superplex. Like, it's basically a whole match at the top of the top rope right there. They must have been up there for 2 minutes? Maybe less than that.
It felt like a war up there, back and forth, back and forth.
It reminded me of Paul London against Bryan Danielson from Night of the Butcher. If you ever want to anyone wants to go back and listen to that review, they have a war at the top rope. So there's Joe goes for the muscle buster, but Punk aggressively fights him off with strikes to the back. But Joe gets back up as that guy yells belly to belly, come on Joe, and the ref counts down the final seconds as Joe hits the muscle buster, or something that was an approximation of a muscle buster, and the time runs out. So what I love about that last 20 minutes is that they are hitting all these big moves, but not really, if you think about it. There's no muscle buster to the last second. There is no Pepsi plunge. There is no choke. There is no island driver. There is no dragon suplex. They saved a lot. Even in 2 hours, they saved a lot. They talked in the shoot interview after their first match about how they didn't do too much in that first match. They didn't do too much in the second match, and they did everything in the second match. So they still had stuff to save. As far as the match itself, I think it was pretty close to flawless. Like the 2 guys said in their shoot interview that they were upset that the announcer wasn't counting down the time cues. And I could see that. Like, I think it probably would have been better if they were like 5 minutes left, 1 minute left, and there was that sense of urgency. But the crowd had that sense of urgency anyway. And what I just loved about this match was it didn't seem like it was trying too hard. Like, it was just great because it was great. It wasn't great because they went out there to be like, let's have an epic. The big knock on a lot of these modern matches, WWE, even New Japan, Indies, is the idea of the self-conscious epic. Yeah. Where these guys do everything in the kitchen sink and they have all this drama, but it's clearly they knew they were going to have all this drama and they wanted everyone to say this was the best match they've ever seen. These 2 guys wanted to have a really great match, but they didn't go out there let's just paint this Picasso masterpiece. They were just let's just do our thing and tell a good story and have a good match. And the match ended up being that much better for it. You don't see too many matches like this where they're not going for this over the top drama. They just have natural drama because it's CM Punk's hometown. They both have great chemistry. Their moves look good. Their pacing was great. The story just worked because Punk had Joe's number, but he just couldn't overcome Joe's dominance in the end, but Joe couldn't put Punk away either. And there was no fat in this match. There was no silliness in this match. There was no dead moments in this match. This is another one of those matches where I'm like, oh, it's an hour. I'm just going to watch a half hour of it and then watch the second half hour tomorrow. But before I knew it, the match was over because it went by so fast. there's just nothing negative I can say about it. I think this match holds up 16 years later. I think it is probably the best match up to this point that we've reviewed. The only match that I could think of that I liked nearly as much was that Bryan Danielson versus Low-Ki match. But this match just had more context. It had just more of a storyline throughout. I think, the characters were more beloved at this point. The stakes felt higher. One of the things that really put this match over for a lot of people was how prestigious it made the ROH belt seem. And it really, really did. It really did make this belt seem extremely prestigious. This really does feel like the most important belt in the world during the time that this match is taking place. And, if you're watching this match, it's hard-pressed to feel like this isn't the most important belt in the world and that this isn't the most important match going on in the world in that week. So I think they did everything that they wanted to do and probably a lot more. I don't think they had any clue that they were going to be doing something like this. But yeah, I think 5 stars.
So first off, Matt, let me just say that's some of your best work ever on this podcast. I can't believe you did such a great job recapping that match. And I think I would have lost my voice at that point. You did such a great job. You never this match has brought out the best in us even. Well, you. We'll see what it does in me.
Thank you.
But I think this match was it was pretty overrated. It's not that good. Anyway, moving on to the next. So it's interesting. Some people do think this match is overrated. And one thing I will say right off the bat about this match that I said about the first hour-long match these two had is I think these are both matches where I think they're great with no context, but I do think they're extra great if you have the context. For example, the stuff you were talking about in that first half an hour where Samoa Joe, the first half an hour of this match is all about Samoa Joe being frustrated. You point out all the things where, he goes out of the ring to catch his breath, which he never does. He kicks the guardrail in frustration when a fan's yelling at him, which he never does. He does these things and if you come into this match with no context, you'll be okay, he's getting a little bit out wrestled and he's frustrated. I've seen that in a million matches. But if you're a Ring of Honor fan from this period and you've watched a lot of the shows or every show like us, that's never happened. It's a way bigger deal to someone like us because because of the storytelling. Because it's storytelling that's not a story being told in one match. It's a story being told in the booking and in 20 matches. It's the idea of Joe is kind of giving Punk something which he's built up for years, which is, or at least a year, which is Joe is the guy who, yes, he's gotten pinned in matches, and yes, guys have hurt him, but Joe in most of his matches, especially during this title run, he's never on defense for very long. Joe has never in Ring of Honor been on a match like this where for the first half an hour he gets a little bit of offense, but really Punk just dominates him and doesn't let Joe be Joe, to put it simply. And
yeah, you compare it to the match the night before, and it's a world of difference in what Joe gets to do.
Yeah, and again, that's I think you can enjoy that story if you've never watched any Ring of Honor, but where it becomes just another level is knowing everything it's playing off of and knowing how special this is. Because for the character, it's such a different moment for him. He's pushed into a place he's never been before. And so all that. So first off, I want to say that to people that think it's a bit overrated. I think that's why some people, not to say that people's opinions aren't valid, but I just do think that's one of the reasons why some people think it's overrated, maybe because they don't have the context like that, which is, it's not their fault. You don't always have to have the context. But I think it's great no matter how much context you have. And the other thing I want to start off this quickly by saying is, well, not quickly, but the first match, it's funny, my memories of these matches, my memory of the first match where I said, boy, I remember this having more headlocks, and you were thinking of this match, and you're right. I also remember this match between the shoot interview comments, which we'll get to and stuff, which is, this match was all about playing off the first match. That's what these guys said it was about and stuff. And they do play off spots in the first, but what I was struck by rewatching this is that more than it playing off the first match, although it does, it feels way more like they took the first match and just said, let's do it better. It's like because it really is the same basic story apart from the rope-a-dope part. It's Punk is trying to beat Joe by grounding him with headlocks, making him go deep into a match which he's never done before, or in this case has only done once before, and Joe didn't win that match. And then after about the half an hour in both matches, Punk kind of drops the headlocks because Joe's worn down, and it becomes more of a regular match, but now Joe's in the deep waters. And it's just this match, it's like it's a version of that match, except like you said, it's way more focused. Like it feels like from the start, it's a 60-minute match where it feels like they're not fucking around. Like everything has purpose. Everything's about telling a story. It's a very confident match in that way. It feels like these guys know exactly what they want to do. But also all the weaknesses that we had in the first match are gone. Like you mentioned, there's that part that we didn't like, but I think some people that reading the reviews at the time hated even more. That part you mentioned in the first match where Joe and Punk like yell at the heckler in the crowd and kill a few minutes with that, which they admitted in the shoot interview. Joe says, in that first match, I thank God for that fan because I was dying out there and I was out of ideas. There's nothing like this in this match. The closest that comes to it is there's a heckler in the crowd early on, and Punk has Joe in a headlock, and he says something like, the door's that way, asshole, or something like that, and the crowd cheers, and that's it. Like everything else about the match, there's no time killing like that, or no things that make the match feel trivial. There was a botch or two in the first match. There's a couple CM Punk spots that look sloppy. The very end spot from Joe that's supposed to be the Muscle Buster is sloppy enough that it looks, you're not quite sure it's a Muscle Buster, but there's no outright botch in the match, so that's fixed. The problem with the last match I also had was, the end was a little anticlimactic where it just ends with Punk hitting a DDT as time expires. This time, they end with what's supposed to be the Muscle Buster. So I gave that match 4.25 stars. I think I said I agreed with Dave Meltzer's rating of it at that time. This match, is a significant improvement on an already great match because it gets rid of basically every flaw of the first match, and then it just gives you more of what was great about the first match. The story of it, it's Matt, you went over it. It's basically first half an hour is Punk dominating. Next 15 minutes is more like Joe finally makes his comeback and Punk's in trouble. And then final 15 minutes is more of just back and forth, which is the way a lot of indie matches end in, except this one, they've earned it because they've told a real story to build up to that last 15 minutes. But I would say the funny thing is, while the part where they're on the top rope fighting for the Pepsi Plunge or the Muscle Buster, like that's one of the best spots in the match. I agree. I would say the last 15 minutes, in some ways, like I think the whole match is amazing, but like it's in some ways my least favorite part of the match, even though it's the most exciting part of the match with the biggest spots and the crowd's going the craziest, because it's more like other wrestling matches. Like the first 45 minutes are way different than everything we've seen in Ring of Honor before. And then in the last 15 minutes is more like we've taken a different road to get closer to where these matches usually go. Although, like you said, even then, Joe is a guy who he's finished matches in so many different ways in this title run. In the match the night before, he won with an STF. But like you said, he doesn't use the Iron Driver, doesn't use the Muscle Buster. Punk used the Pepsi Plunge in the first match, but they worked over his knee. So when he landed knees first on the Pepsi Plunge, he immediately rolled out of the ring. So we've never gotten like a near fall off the Pepsi Plunge, and we don't get the Pepsi Plunge this time. And there are just so many great moments in this match where it's a really storytelling match. But I think my favorite point in this spot in the whole match is, a big part of this match is Punk frustrating Joe, and like we said, and then he gets to hit the Olay kick twice on Joe, and Joe doesn't get to hit it yet, and he even does the face wash to Joe before Joe gets to do it, and then finally Joe, you think he's going to get the Olay kick, and you think, okay, we've kind of seen the swerve, which is Punk controls Joe and hits his own moves to him, but now Joe's going to get his turn. And then as Joe's going to do the Olay kick, Punk like hulks up and jumps out of the chair, and they get into this really intense emotional brawl. And right in front of Dr. Keith, who is like if you don't know what Dr. Keith looks like, just look for the really tall, shaved head gentleman in the front row who is often seen studiously writing in his notepad in the front row. Watch him. He's right like behind these guys as they get into this brawl. Dr. Keith like just becomes overcome with joy as he sees what's happening in front of him. And it's such a great little moment where you think you're not going to see that moment. You think, okay, Punk's had his turn. Now it's time for Joe's turn. And then they still give you the Joe Olay kick right after that, but they give you this extra bit. And I just love how everything it feels like a war. It tells such a great story. Like you said, it doesn't feel like a self-conscious epic. It feels like, in a way, like the best version of what it is, which is a match these two did not even plan on having probably a week before. And I guess my last thing before we can talk about other stuff around this match, my last thought before I take a breath is I think this is CM Punk's at least, maybe I'll see a future one that's better on rewatch, but this is his best pure baby face performance ever. I think CM Punk is a guy like a lot of wrestlers where people think, oh, he relished playing a heel more than a face, and he was a better natural heel than he was a face. And even a lot of times when he was a face, he was more like the anti-hero, kind of still acted like a bit of a dick. This match is about as close as you'll ever to see to CM Punk being like the pure white meat baby face, where he's vibing off the crowd's energy and like acknowledging them, and he's carrying himself like he's the king shit of the city, which I guess for this night he is. And the crowd, I would say, is 65-35 for Punk. Like, they're definitely fans of Joe, but even that is a cool difference because Joe is usually not, Joe gets boos at certain points in this match occasionally. Joe is this is an away game for Joe where he's such a beloved figure in Ring of Honor. Normally every match is like his home game. It's his house. This is another interesting flip if you're a longtime fan but going back to Punk, like, he is really good in this match as just a pure, like, super babyface. Like, especially like when Joe's in the second half of the match, that next 15 minutes after the first half an hour, where Joe is really getting his first big offense on Punk. Joe's Punk's selling, like, the way he really just makes Joe look like a killer. Like, it's great babyface physical selling. It's just, again, there's a lot of things in this match which are just different sides of these two guys you don't see usually that are great. And as far as I would give this match 5 stars, I remember, I listened to the Voices of Wrestling podcast a lot. Joe Lanza, he has this rule, not that everyone has to use this, but he always says, if you have to think for even a second if a match is 5 stars, it's not 5 stars. I will say I did have to think for a second if this match is 5 stars. So if I want to go by that rule, maybe I think it's just a hair below. If I wanted to really nitpick the match, I would say that the end spot, which is supposed to be Joe hitting a muscle buster, but it's so sloppy you can't really tell. I would say, knowing that the story of these matches, which is Punk draws Joe twice and then really wants a third match and Joe's kind of running from him, I wouldn't have ended the match with Joe maybe looking like he's about to win. I would have ended it with either them even or preferably Punk looking like he's about to win. So you really make that moment, like, you really make the fans feel like if Punk just had another minute, it would have been his. Where instead, if anything, you have this idea that maybe if there was another 30 seconds, maybe Joe would have actually beaten Punk. I think that kind of goes against the story they're trying to tell of the ring. But really, this is one of the greatest matches we've seen up to this point. It's like you said, you mentioned Danielson Key. I would put this, where we rank it, I don't know. That might be years down the line if we rank everything we've watched. But so far of the matches we see, it's in the pantheon of that match. It's in the pantheon with our match of the year for 2003, which is Carino and Homicide. It is one of the very best matches they've ever done in this company. It's one of Samoa Joe's very best matches. It's one of CM Punk's very best matches. It's one of the very best matches in company history. It's a fantastic match that is still great. More than great. It's more than great. It's fantastic. It stands, at least in our opinion, the test of time, I think.
Yeah. Now, I actually could even come back with the ending a little bit, in the sense of, if you look at the post-match promos, the ending actually does work for the storyline, because Punk's whole argument is, we don't know if the Muscle Buster can beat me, but I know that the Pepsi Plunge can beat you because Homicide pinned you after I hit you with it in Boston. So in some ways, it actually played into their storyline that Punk had been hit by the plunge, but he has this deniability of saying, but you didn't beat, but it didn't pin me, and we don't know if it can.
Yeah, that's a good point. I still there's still part of me that I just wish Punk, but at the same time, I feel like an idiot for complaining because it did not hurt the third match at all, or people's anticipation, or what people felt about this match. So I guess that's why I prefaced it by saying, if I really, really wanted to nitpick, like we're talking about, like, I think for you and I, we're not Dave Meltzer 2020, where if we say a match is 5 stars, that means it's actually on a 7-star scale. Like, 5 stars is saying this is the best possible rating to give a match. So I guess I'm only saying, if I really wanted to hyper-analyze, does this deserve to be, like, I'll say this is not the best match I've seen in my life. It might be the best match I've ever seen in Ring of Honor. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I have some biases toward matches I saw in person that happened after this. But as far as our rewatch goes, can't think of any that I've thought was better. But you know, that whole well, I guess we'll talk about the responses of other people now. But I'll save my comment for a little while from now.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to look at my notes. Is there anything I missed before we get to the reaction afterwards? I'm just trying to take a quick look.
Actually, one thing I'll say about the post-match, because the post-match is just basically they chant for 5 more minutes, right? And but then they give up that pretty quickly. Joe kind of holds the belt up, and that's it. And then you see kind of like the crowd cheering, chanting ROH and chanting for CM Punk as the lights come up. But like, I like that they didn't do a whole post-match like love fest, because a lot of these great ROH matches, including the first 1-hour match, they did that. And it kind of makes it even feel even more organic, less self-conscious that they didn't do that. Like, they didn't dwell on the greatness of the match. They were just like, we did the match, Joe gets out of there because he still has his belt. I like that. Simple, no, not over the top. I appreciated that.
Yeah, I think you're having a great point where you keep coming back to that idea. Like, this is a great match for people that, if for some reason you haven't watched this match and you're listening to this podcast, like, if you're one of these people like that thinks that stuff like a lot of the Kenny Omega Okada matches or stuff, like, those are some of the matches where people say like they're self-conscious epics and stuff like that. Like, if you're a person that wants a match that kind of feels like an epic, but doesn't feel like that's not to, I'm not personally criticizing those matches, but if you believe that those matches have that kind of vibe, I think this match is kind of your answer for that. Because I think you'll still get a lot of what a big, long, epic world title match feels like without it. This feels this feels about as unassuming as an epic match can feel like, I would say.
Right. It's like workmanlike. Like, these are just two guys. They're going out there. They're doing their job, and they just did as good of a job you can possibly do at it.
You know what it almost reminds me of is, I think we mentioned on a recent show, I brought up, like, there was an old comment where Ric Flair used to say that, if people thought those 3 matches in 1989 on pay-per-view and TV that I had with Steamboat were good, like, we had matches better than that on house shows, like a lot of them. This almost feels like 2 guys on that level where it's like they could probably have like another 10 matches like this. Like, they're just at this point in their careers on a vibe together,
Yes.
Like where you don't feel like you watch this match and it's great and it feels special and amazing, but it doesn't feel like these 2 could never recreate this ever again. Like, you don't feel where a lot of great matches do feel like everything just clicked and they'll never have a chance like this again. Like, this doesn't feel like that.
No, but could they ever really get to this level again with all the stars aligning in terms of like the crowd and like the hometown and the surprise factor and like the moment in time of the belt? So in that sense, yes, it was like things did click. But in terms of like what they did in the ring, I agree with you.
Yeah. Maybe at a different time, like if they were back in the NWA 80s where they were on the house show loop a lot. But yeah, they do wrestle again, not just in Ring of Honor, but at least I think once in Britain and maybe somewhere else one time. I'm not sure.
Germany, I think.
Yeah, maybe that's what I was thinking of. They wrestled once or twice. I know they had a match at PWG, which might have been before this. I'm not sure. And of course they had the Ring of Honor match in 2003, which was just okay. It was solid, but it wasn't anything special. But I do get the feeling that if these 2 had to wrestle each other a bunch more times, maybe it wouldn't have the same atmosphere this did, but I bet you they could keep a really high standard during this period, because I think they were just connecting in a way, like a special way. But I even love, Joe pulls out the top rope splash, which Punk rolls out of the way of. How often does he do that? Not very often. I loved how CM Punk, he kind of did another thing he borrowed from Steamboat, where during the second half of the match, he makes these little comebacks, but he always but he never really wins them. Like, I love how he does these little comebacks to let you know he's still in the fight, but Joe is still dominating him. It doesn't turn the tide of the match. And I love how they kept this thing up of the first match, which is Punk gets into some strike exchanges with Joe in this match. And another flaw they fixed in the first match, I found in that first match, Punk's strikes did not look like carry the weight close to Joe's, and they look kind of weak, and I didn't like that Joe sold for some of them. This time Punk is much more intense and lays in the strike exchanges generally a little bit more, which again fixes another problem. But I like that both these matches for 2 hours, Punk loses every strike exchange. He'll get some good licks in some, but he always loses on the end. Like, that's part of the story, which is Joe is better, in a fist fight, in a, kickboxing match, he's going to beat Punk, even if Punk tries. And I love, more detail work like that. It's just so great. The one last thing before we get to the aftermatch reaction I wanted to ask is this the first time in Ring of Honor history that the fans clapped in time to Punk's music? It was during the match, not at the entrance, but there's a couple of times where they're trying to rally him, where they're clapping in time to the AFI song, like the beat. I'm not sure if this is the first time, but it's definitely an early time.
I'd have to think more about that.
Yeah. So, that's the match. That's our thoughts. But this was one of the most important matches in Ring of Honor history up to this point, for a few reasons. But first off, this was let me just say, this was the best-selling DVD in Ring of Honor history up to this point, and it would be the best until a year later when Joe versus Kobashi came out. So that's pretty impressive when you think a lot of these shows, when you think about the show that comes next is Liger versus Danielson. And there was other shows, 2003, Final Battle, which had a loaded card, and they brought in Great Muta. And a lot of these shows, you had different appearances from guys like Foley. You had big matches on other shows. This was the best-selling show they'd ever done and would be for another year. So, and why was that? Well, it was because of the reaction, both from the live reaction of people watching, but because this match got more attention than any Ring of Honor match had gotten in its history. Like, I think I talked about on another show once how the way the Wrestling Observer newsletter is formatted, it's like the first half of the newsletter is stories, whatever Dave thinks are the big stories of the week, and then the second half is like sections that appear in every issue. Like, here's all the All Japan news, here's all the New Japan news, here's all the WWF news, here's all the WCW news, and then there was a here and there section where Ring of Honor would always get their blurbs in the here and there section.
Until like 2005, that's when they started getting their own section, yeah.
Yeah, and to give you an idea of how big the deal this was, Ring of Honor, I think, had gotten 2, maybe 3 stories that were not in the here and there section before this. One, I think, was Final Battle 2003, which was their biggest attendance up to that point, had the Great Muta on it. One was the Feinstein scandal, which is not how you want to get into the front pages of any publication. And then there was this. When Dave actually saw this match, he made out of his way to write an entire story in the front pages just talking about how great this match was. And more than that, he gave it a rating, and he gave it 5 stars. Now, people listening to this might go, Trevor, guys, that isn't a big deal. Dave gives matches 6.5 stars, 5. He gives matches 5 stars all the time. This is not a big deal. What the hell are you talking about? Why is this important? And why should anyone even care? Dave Meltzer's just one man. So I think we need to get into that. First off, Ring of Honor, you have to remember, was a company at this point. This was before pay-per-views. This was before live streaming. This was a company sold on live ticket sales, but primarily on DVD sales. And it was a company aimed at hardcore fans, the kind of fans that would search out the best indie wrestling, that would know who these guys were. They weren't seeing them on TV, most of them. Some of them were on TNA, and the most hardcore of the hardcores. In other words, their fan base were the people that would read the Wrestling Observer, the Torch, they would be on message boards. That was their fan base. So Gabe cared a great deal about what the newsletters meant. Have you ever read the Ring of Honor website during this era, or ever got like a Ring of Honor DVD catalog sent to you? Every page was covered with the Observer said this match got this. Mike Johnson said this match got this. The Pro Wrestling Torch said this match got this. The blurb, those were their Roger Ebert blurbs on a movie poster. It was very important. So that's one half of it. The other half of it is Dave Meltzer did not usually used to give every match 5 stars. Like, I'm not saying whether you think Dave has gone nuts or overkill or whatever. That's a different conversation. We can just say Dave had given 2. Technically, when Dave says it was never a 5-star match scale, I think he's being kind of crazy because it usually was. But technically, there were 2 matches he had given 6 stars to. He gave one of the Flair Steamboat matches 6 stars, and he gave Kawada Misawa from '94 6 stars.
Have you actually read him give those 6 stars? Because
I saw that in Wikipedia. I think he has referenced in the past that he gave the Steamboat Flair match 6 stars.
Because I've read those reviews, and I don't remember him giving them 6 stars, but, I guess Dave knows better than I do.
And I think he said he might have given like a Terry Funk match, like maybe Jerry Lawler Terry Funk match or something 6 stars. Well, I don't know. But the point is,
yeah, I don't buy it, Dave. But anyway,
the point is, and he said like Cornette invented and he gave something 6 stars, whatever. But the point is, let's take it back to this time. Dave Meltzer very rarely gave matches 5 stars. He might get 1 or 2 a year, and that's for the whole world. Now, think about this.
I was going to say Japan got 1 in 2004. I think they got 1 in 2003. But go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So there had not been a match in the United States of America that had gotten 5 stars from Dave Meltzer since 1997. That is 7 years. Not since Shawn Michaels versus Undertaker, Hell in the Cell at Bad Blood. He had never given not a WWF match, not a WCW match, nothing. 5 stars.
And by the way, can I just add one more thing to this?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So after the Hell in the Cell match between Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker in 1997, the next WWE match to get 5 stars happened in 2011. And it was CM Punk versus John Cena at Money in the Bank. So basically, there were literally 14 years in between 5-star WWE matches.
Yeah, I mean, that's wild, and obviously people are going to argue. This will turn into a thing. But the point of it isn't necessarily you have to agree or whatever. The point I guess what I'm trying to make is
it was a big deal.
It was a big deal because there was a lot of people that were going to buy this tape or try Ring of Honor for the first time because Dave Meltzer gave it 5 stars. Nowadays, there are 5-star matches that happen in New Japan. They happen so frequently that there are 5-star matches that when I looked them up, like people don't remember them or think of them as classics. Back in like the 90s, because 5-star matches happened so infrequently, like anytime Dave Meltzer gave a 5-star match 5 stars, people went out of their way to see it, even if it wasn't like a scene they really knew or were a big fan of. It was a huge deal because it was a very rare thing. And so this was a huge deal for Ring of Honor. It was a huge deal to get 5 stars, and it was something that was going to get people to try the product that had never tried it before. So going to the notes, first Dave just got live reports. He hadn't gotten the tape yet. He wrote in the Observer, reports from many different people now that we've talked to who saw both Punk Joe matches, said it was better than their match in Dayton, and crowd was super hot for the last 10 minutes. Mick Foley called it one of the best live matches he's ever seen. What was amazing was late in the match, Foley went into the stands to watch the bout, and nobody came up to him instead of watching the bout. Punk wound up with a black eye. That's something we forgot to mention. Punk gets a black eye in this match. Both guys got standing ovations. Punk wanted a no time limit title match when they returned on February 26th, Dave writes, which I think was edited. I think other live reports said that too, which is an interesting thing because I think that tells you, Matt, that Punk and Joe maybe didn't know where this feud was going. Well, definitely, because I mentioned before, they didn't know that the third match was supposed to be in December, which it was.
Joe didn't know when he was losing the title.
Yeah, I was about to say, that probably tells you Joe didn't know he was going to lose the title in December. Because why else would you even tease that? That, when we come to Chicago in late February, by then he's actually feuding with Jimmy Rave by that point, and Joe's hasn't been the champion for a couple months, or 3 months almost. So that's that. I think that's a pretty interesting anecdote that Foley's like, no one even noticed I was there. And I guess some live report also said that like it was cool, like you could see Gabe in the crowd near the end, and that Gabe was really marking out in the crowd. Like it was one of those matches
with Mark Nolte, of course.
But it definitely does indicate this was one of those matches that felt like people knew it was special probably before it was over even. And then I don't know if I should read all of this, but this was the story that sold a lot of DVDs. This is the Observer story after Dave watched it, his review. Dave wrote, one of the most talked about matches of late was the 10-16 Samoa Joe versus CM Punk 60-minute draw from Chicago Ridge, Illinois for the Ring of Honor title. It was the rematch of their 60-minute draw on June 12th in Dayton, which I gave 4.25 stars to, that many had talked about as a match of the year contender. Mick Foley watched the Chicago Ridge match, seeing the second half in the stands, and nobody even noticed he was there because there was so much attention on the match. Dave really likes that anecdote. Foley called it one of the best matches he'd ever seen live. Everyone who saw both matches said the Chicago Ridge match was better, and after seeing it, I think it was considerably better. The match really exemplified the upside of Ring of Honor, which is, to their niche audience, the booking of the championship as the main character. The story here was as old as wrestling. Samoa Joe played world champion, who is respected but plays very subtle heel, only because the challenger, Punk, is a local product. What made the match was, in 2004, they got the audience to totally buy into the idea that the belt is a meaningful world title. With the exception of Noah, which books the world champion similarly, no other worked promotion can get that kind of intensity from the crowd in their world title matches now. Although there were some early in the year WWE matches like Eddie Guerrero versus Brock Lesnar at the Cow Palace and the WrestleMania main event from Madison Square Garden that did as well. To go 60 minutes today, you need everything working for you. You need wrestlers who are over and a title which people take seriously. When Triple H and Chris Benoit tried to do it on Raw, realistically, it failed. While the crowd was into the final 10 minutes, they didn't care much about anything but the finish, and they knew the finish wasn't coming. Of course, that's the problem with the Iron Man dynamic, as opposed to a match that simply goes the hour. The downside is it was 750 people in a city the size of Chicago. Ring of Honor delivers the nearly perfect product for its audience, but right now the audience still is smaller than it needs to be. But the crowd was buzzing for this match even before it started, which was half the battle. After the Japanese streamers opened, the early part of this match was very much superior to the first match. The first match had them playing around with a ringside fan, and they were trying to kill time, knowing they were going so long. This match saw them do a lot of mat wrestling, but they never lost focus on the goal of making it appear to be a realistic match for a realistic title. The crowd took to the realism as every escape and exchange got a reaction, even though it was mainly moves like headlocks, head scissors, and hammerlocks. A WWE crowd would have lost interest early, although that's irrelevant because this crowd didn't, and you can't possibly do a bunch of big moves early in a 60-minute match or the crowd will burn out long before the halfway point. I was really impressed with Joe's work as champion because his job was to make Punk credible, but he sacrificed none of his own credibility. He came across as something special himself, and if he doesn't, people don't think the belt means anything if the champ isn't something special. Kind of a weird sentence. There were some big moves as starting at about 25 minutes in, such as Joe doing a suplex on the floor, Punk with a tope, and then playing off each other's trademark moves, most of which are Japanese-inspired. Joe, at his size, did an elbow suicida, which is a tope ending with an elbow smash. It really turned into something special about 45 minutes in, with some great near falls, with WrestleMania main event-like crowd intensity. They weren't moves you hadn't seen, but they were good, believable exchanges of strikes and moves, throwing in Japanese-style spots with a little MMA. At 52 minutes, loud Ring of Honor chants started, and it was clear it didn't matter who won the match at that point because people thought it was so good. The show ended with submissions and near falls, with the idea of it peaking when Joe did the muscle buster just as time it was running out. On the home video, which was just released, there are minor problems. You don't hear the ring noise in the first 15 minutes, but that gets corrected and you do get the crowd noise. Matt, first off, let's just say, in the version we watched, which is the home release, you hear crowd noise the whole match, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's saying you don't get the ring noise, like as in like what noises the wrestlers are making.
I didn't notice.
No, I didn't notice that either. I don't know if he got the final version of that.
But in the end, that barely matters. The commentary, done by Mark Nolte and Booker Gabe Sapolsky, who uses a pseudonym of Jimmy Bauer for some reason, even though I'm guessing 95% of the people buying the tapes know it's him, was good. Nolte is excellent in this kind of environment, doing the X's and O's style of sports commentary and explaining strategy and the story of the match. At the 42-minute mark, they cut out the commentary, saying the match is so great they wanted to watch it from the stands. In most cases, that would be a bad idea, particularly in a match where the story is so much of the bout. It didn't hurt this match at all, as just with the visuals and no commentary, it is clear it's one of the best matches in years, and I'd give it 5 stars. The idea that the match wouldn't play as well with another crowd, which is true, is irrelevant.
Finally, Dave, you acknowledge this.
I feel like, Matt, that this in a weird way is like the payoff to us doing Through the Years for 3 years and being annoyed over and over again that Dave keeps saying, this match was great in Ring of Honor, but it wouldn't have gotten over in WWE. It's like finally Dave goes the other way. Like he's almost like refuting himself where he's like, he keeps bringing it up and then it's like, well, that's irrelevant. It's like Dave is Gollum and Smeagol fighting with himself. The match showed that if you book something to be important, prestigious, your audience ultimately will take it that it is. Joe in the champ role has been protected and made to look strong. The idea of a 60-minute match is that it is supposed to elevate the title and make the challenger seem on the level as the champion. It sure worked in both aspects. Here in both aspects, the idea of the champion there to mainly get over the challenger for frequent title changes or ref bumps and run-ins. Dave's kind of going over there. When you think the champ is retaining it via a fluke, is lucky to hold the title, and therefore create the emotion that the next time you see him, he'll probably lose the title, would make this mean the same as any other title does to his audience. Very little. It's not just the audience. I'm just going to try and go through this with Dave's. Well, wait. Dave writes, it's not just the audience because it's the same crowd that cared very little about the same title early in the promotion's history when they put it on Xavier. Poor Xavier. With the idea that top guys didn't need the belt and the belt would make Xavier a star. Joe doesn't need the belt, but if anyone else had it, it wouldn't mean all that much. And this is probably the best lesson of all. Joe doesn't need the belt after the belt needed Joe. After nearly 2 years as champion, they've created a situation where when it does change hands, it will be huge. It's an emotion a lot of newer fans can't comprehend and current writers would think is ancient. Yet with all the companies doing it the new way, nobody even knows or cares who the champions are, even the fans in the building. And if they see it change, they probably won't remember it more than a week later. The idea that seeing a world title change was something you were lucky to see live and you would never see on television except on videotape once in your lifetime. They say that's ancient thinking, and I thought you couldn't have much more than a one-year run as champion in modern wrestling because the audience won't care and you run out of challengers. Yet in 2004, the only 2 belts that are able to garner intensity and believability every time out are Joe's belt and Kenta Kobashi's. In both cases, it's the lengthy title reign that hasn't made the title situation boring, and the clean finishes, no ref bumps, and outside interference hasn't made it hard to put together finishes. Both belts mean far more at the end of 2004 than they did at the end of 2003, at which time both men had already held those belts too long, quote-unquote, for the modern fan. We're almost done. The nearly 2 years without a title change have elevated the titles to where every title match, just by being a title match, now has the feel of being more important. What have become the booking crutches to get a reaction, the controversial finishes and the title changes, are the very things that appear to be what is crippling the idea of what a championship used to be, and apparently still can be today. Anyone who is considering voting for the match of the year needs to go out of your way to get this video. If you aren't, it's a great match to enjoy and even more to learn from. So that was Dave on one of the front pages of The Observer going out of his way to put over this match. Matt, the only thing I would say I disagree with that is Dave says Joe didn't need the title. The belt needed Joe. I would say like Joe and the belt needed each other at the start of the reign. Like certainly Joe didn't need the title at this point, but Joe definitely gained a lot from being the champ.
Yeah, Joe wouldn't have been the star that he was in ROH at this point if he hadn't been the champion. So...
Going to other reviews, Wade Keller gave the match 4 3/4 stars. He said they built slowly for 30 minutes. If you've never seen Joe or Punk before, the nuances of the early action where every move meant something based on their past might seem a bit tedious. The last 30 minutes show off Ring of Honor at its best and why Joe's the best world champion in this country in years. It was believable, intense, enthralling, dramatic, exhilarating, and somehow a notch better than their June 12th classic, The State of the Art, 4 3/4 stars. I stopped short of 5 stars on the main event rating because never in the first 30 minutes was there any sense that this match was going anything but at least 45 minutes. In other words, it seemed as if they were pacing themselves compared to their usual style, where there's more of a sense of urgency. It's a small criticism, and the last 30 minutes was as good as anything, but that's why I stopped short of 5 stars. The match, though, was from start to finish, was true to the characters and the feud. Mark Nolte has become a great color commentator for this style. He would really be valuable for any first-time Ring of Honor viewers who hadn't seen previous Joe Punk encounters.
I mean, they're right that Mark Nolte is great in this particular type of match.
Yeah, the problem is it's not the rest of it. Bruce Mitchell gave the whole show a 7.5 out of 10. He says, buy this tape, buy it for the 60-minute Ring of Honor title match between Samoa Joe and CM Punk. Buy it for the hard work. Most of all, buy it for the passion of a company that made its name and its stars with no help, no superstar rub, no television, in the midst of a recession. Boy, Matt, I could go for a 2004 recession right now. I like this part. I'm not going to read all this, but Bruce writes, CM Punk shouldn't be a good wrestler. He's not the natural athlete for it, but he adds more moves and more stamina in every performance. I don't think he adds more moves and more stamina, especially when he was doing 93-minute matches in 2003. Like, that sounds like Bruce often sounds, which is like a guy who doesn't watch very much Ring of Honor.
And doesn't want to admit it.
Yeah, and kind of making assumptions.
What Punk does is his execution keeps getting better.
Yes. Anyway, so he ended his much like Dave writing, buy this tape. Everyone, I'm just going through this really quickly. This live report writes from that wrote into PW Insider. Let me see if I can just make sure to credit the person. A guy just named Jimothy was his username. It was really cool to see Gabe Sapolsky out in the crowd watching the last 20 minutes or so of the match too. He was clapping along with the crowd and kept cheering along. Right at the end of the match, H.C. Loke came out and stood right near our section of the general admission seats, and I was almost 100% sure that Punk was going to pull it out and that he just wanted to be out there to experience it, but alas, it was for naught. After the match, Punk pretty much challenged / announced / hinted that there will be a rematch February 26th in Chicago, which again, no. Finally, let's just go over some notes from the shoot interview, the Joe Punk straight shooting about the match. Punk says he felt like at least 75% of the crowd knew they were going to a draw this time, or at least for the first 50, or they were going to go at least 50 to 55 minutes. Joe says that they didn't plan out a lot of stuff for this match because of all of the things that went on before the match, the abrupt nature of how it came to be. Punk says, like the first draw, a lot of the match was thought up on the fly. Punk says they had the idea of having a lot of headlock spots from the first match or switching them up. Punk uses the phrase learn spots to describe kind of the psychology of this and talks about the story idea that this time Joe would reverse more of Punk's stuff, be more prepared as opposed to the first draw where Punk's strategy caught him off guard. Punk says the best stuff in this match, though, was all thought up on the fly. Joe says, as Matt mentioned earlier, that he thought of that stretch that had Punk nearly bent backwards like Jack Evans. Punk jokes at this point in the shoot, did I mention I had a bad back? And Joe laughs at this point, and Punk says that he was Joe says Punk was cussing him out the entire time, saying stuff like, you son of a bitch, I hope you're finding this really amusing. Joe estimates 8% of the match was on the fly in the ring. He talks about the spear being thought up impromptu. Punk talks about listening to the crowd, giving them more of what they reacted to and less of what they didn't. Punk says both of the draws had big fight feels, and he's still stunned he's such a babyface in Chicago. At this point in the shoot, Joe interjects, because he's been an asshole to so many people there, which I love the Joe Punk like friendship chemistry.
Punker.
Yeah, Punker says this match gave this match a different dynamic. Punk and Joe both think the match turned out great. Punk says on different days you'll get a different answer from him if the second or the third match was the best of their trilogy. Punk says he knew about 8 minutes into the match that they had the crowd in the palm of their hands and they were going to go nuts for the story they had planned on that night. Punk then says that when they were doing the late match fight on the top rope and the crowd was booing and cheering, he and Joe were like ecstatic with each other on the top turnbuckle. They were just Joe says the only thing he would have changed is to have the time cues announced over the PA. He says he told them to do it, but for some reason it didn't happen. Joe says it wouldn't be to help them. It helps the audience, too. It creates a sense of immediacy, an urgency with the crowd. They felt the match ended a little flat because of that. Joe chalks up to miscommunication because Ring of Honor couldn't fly in all their people that do the odd jobs from the East to the Midwest for the Midwest double shot. Punk says the second match was better than the first. He loves the match despite being his own worst critic. Punk says he and Joe probably talked during the match about how special it felt before it was even over. Joe says Punk had him in a headlock and asked him, "What do you think?" And Joe just told him, "It's going pretty damn good." They both guys then talk about their love of watching the crowd reactions to matches after the fact. Joe says the first time both of them watched this match after it happened on tape, they didn't watch anything that happened in the ring. They just watched crowd reactions. And Punk says it's a great way to learn what works and what doesn't, to rewatch matches and just watch the crowd reactions. And finally, the last note, upon being asked what they thought of Meltzer giving the match 5 stars, Punk says he's never read The Observer, and Joe says he's never had a subscription and only read them from promoters who had them. Joe thought it was a cool. Both guys said it was a really big deal to Gabe, and that he would tell them that getting 5 stars was a big deal, and that wrestlers in the 80s lived and died by The Observer. Joe says it was the most excited he had ever heard Gabe on the phone. Punk says it sunk in for him as a big deal when he learned that the last U.S. match to get 5 stars in the U.S. was Shawn Michaels and Undertaker from Hell in the Cell. So that's all the notes on the match. After the match, the crowd chants for 5 more minutes. Bobby Cruise slides the Ring of Honor world title into the ring for the ref to hand to Joe, and Punk grabs it instead. He stares at it for a while, like gives it this real meaningful stare. Both men get to their feet. Punk hands the belt to Joe. They shake hands. The crowd chants Ring of ROH. Punk stumbles to the back as Joe holds up the belt and walks to the back, leaving – or no, Punk just stumbles. He stumbles back to the mat. Can't read my own notes at this point. As Joe holds up the belt.
You just worked a 60-minute match right there, so that's why.
Yeah, see, I'm losing. See, you're the Punk of this. I'm the Joe. This is me botching the muscle buster at the end.
Oh, no.
You kept it pristine right to the end of your large chunk.
You did like triple what I did. So
no, CM Punk gets loud. Thank you, chants. And then finally we get the last 2 little promos to end the show that we talked about at the start. Cut to backstage post-match. Punk says there's a few things he's certain of, but unfortunately there's more things he's uncertain of. He knows he couldn't get the job done against Joe in 60 minutes, but neither could Joe. Punk knows the Pepsi Plunge can put Joe away because it did in Boston. Unfortunately, Homicide got the pin that night, not him. He also doesn't know if Joe's Muscle Buster can beat him, as he hit it right when time expired. Punk says he knows that they can't do this again. If they can't be contained in 60 minutes, the answer is simple. When they meet again, and then Punk says, we will meet again, whether it's 4 months from now, 8 months from now, a year, Punk says he doesn't care if it's in another country or if it's even for Ring of Honor or another promotion, but he knows it will be for the Ring of Honor title and it will be no time limit, and then we'll learn who is the king of Ring of Honor. So that's Punk's promo. Matt, I thought it was a very good promo, with the only problem being the odd decision at one point to zoom in incredibly close on like one section of CM Punk's face during a random point in this promo.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you used the word decision, because it probably wasn't a decision. It was probably just like somebody just not paying close enough attention.
And finally, we end the show, cutting to Joe somewhere else backstage. Joe says Punk had a second chance and still didn't get the job done against him. Joe says, don't expect to get another shot. And this is one of my favorite lines in wrestling history. Joe says, the job is to beat me, not to survive me. And then Joe says, you had a good effort, Punk, but it was your last one. I love that line. It's basically like a new version of To Be the Man, You Got to Beat the Man. And why I love that line so much, beyond it just sounding so fucking cool, is that when you think of what Joe has to accomplish here, Joe's not turning heel. He's going to be a babyface even long after he loses the title. But in the storyline, he's kind of putting off, the third match. And so he has to kind of do that in a way where he doesn't seem like a complete asshole, even though technically Punk is more the face here, because you're like, yeah, Punk does deserve a rematch. You haven't beaten him yet. But in that one sentence, the job is to beat me, not to survive me, he like really makes you think, well, maybe Joe does have a point. This guy has had 2 hours to face Joe, and he's never beat him. He's just survived him.
Also,
it's a great.
Also, Joe is just his delivery is so cool, like, and chill. Like, he's just like very confident, very serious, and it's like he just makes you buy into what he's saying because he just seems like he believes it. And
so many other wrestlers with that line would come off as like wimps or like scared.
Right. He comes off like he's right. Like that. That's sort of, which is you're right. It's an impressive feat.
And that's the end of the show. And that's a hell of a show. That is like it's weird in a way. It's not a one match show because I think the other two, the other top three matches, the other top two of the final three matches are both pretty good. They're not go out of your way to see, but they're good. And the undercard, there's some enjoyable action, but it's all short, kind of inconsequential stuff. But it's a one match show. But if it's a one match show, it's the best match maybe in Ring of Honor history. It's fantastic. It's something you should go out of your way to see. I think you'll love it more if you have the context, but I think you'll be able to appreciate it even without this context. Fantastic. It's crazy that we're finally here, Matt, that we finally got to see the show again.
Yeah, I mean, I think I liked it. The second half of the show more than you did. I think that the main event is very, very, very good. I don't think anyone would be wasting their time if they watched it. So I think it's a very good show, honestly, all in all. Not the first half of the show didn't have much great stuff, but it did have the novelty of Foley and Steamboat. I thought that it had a bunch of good matches in the second half, and in my opinion, the best match up to this point in Ring of Honor history, as like over a third of the entire presentation. So to me, this is one of the better shows of the year that we've seen. Probably one of the better shows that they've done overall. I still don't know what my show of the year for 2004 is going to be, but I don't think it'll be this one as the show of the year, but it could receive an honorable mention. I will also use that phrase to plug an honorable mention, an excellent Ring of Honor retrospective podcast hosted by Jeff Schwartz and Shane Hagedorn. But no, I think this is a good show, and yeah, but really it's the main event. Like, what else are we talking about here? Joe versus Punk 2 is named after it for a reason. If you haven't seen that match, I'd say as much as of any matches we've talked about, that's a match you have to go see. And as much as that's a 1 hour long commitment, I'm going to ask you to take a 2 hour commitment and watch the first match also.
Mm-hmm. And then re-listen to this podcast when we're asking a 5 hour commitment, and also listen to that one 8 hour commitment, and be sure when we review Punk Joe 3. Okay, and then listen to that show. It's going to be like a 13-hour commitment, maybe.
The point is, you're going to get committed after all of this. So, is that term PC anymore? Probably not.
I'm not sure. My dad was committed once, but that's a long story. Anyway,
okay. No comment.
Thank God my mom doesn't listen to this show, or I'd be getting an angry phone call. So I think the most amazing thing looking back on this show, Matt, or this match, is again going into like the story of it. It wasn't supposed to happen. Like, they don't expressly say this, but I think from watching the shoot interview and reading all the notes and knowing at the booking plans, I think Gabe's plan was always after, Punk and Joe thought up the idea of the hour-long draw. Gabe booked them in Dayton, but they thought up the idea of doing an hour-long draw. And then as we just talked about on this show, then they sat down with Gabe and all agreed, and Punk and Joe seemed to be really behind the gung-ho for the idea of delay it as long as possible. And as we've seen here, I don't think they knew when they were going to get it, but Gabe, it looked like, always knew it was going to be December 4th, which when you think about it, is if you know that you're going to have Joe lose to Aries on Final Battle, 12-4 All-Star Extravaganza 2, which is where Punk Joe 3 will happen, that would literally be the last show you could do Punk Joe for the title before Joe loses the title. So I think if you look at the plan, it was supposed to be only one 1 hour draw, and then probably keep them apart all the way from June to early December, All-Star Extravaganza 2, probably do a match that probably looks like the match they actually have, which is a half an hour match, which means this whole match, which is the one that got the best, all the sales, that got the Observer review, got all the people to fall in love with Ring of Honor and try it and forget about the Feinstein scandal and all that. It was a match that wasn't supposed to happen, which is amazing. Like, there's so many times in life, I was thinking the other day, Matt, I guess the way I'll end my thoughts is, my adult life, there's been so many times where I feel like people sometimes theorize that there's an infinite number of worlds, where an infinite number of possibilities. And a lot of times people will always say, oh, after 9/11 or after the last year or two, like, oh, we're living in one of the bad timelines. I feel like this match is one of those rare moments in my adult life, as cringy as it is to give it this much importance, where I feel like because so many weird things had to happen for this match to take place, that this is one of those times where, like, we live in a weird timeline, but it worked out to our advantage. Like, it feels like if you took 100 random timelines, 97 of them wouldn't have had the second Joe Punk match draw. And we got it. And it's great.
But you still won't give it 5 stars, even though you have all that to say
Okay,
about
it's 5 stars. It's 5 stars. 5 stars. No, it's 5.25. Now I've one-upped you, Matt. Now I've done a Meltzer. 5.25. I've never said there's an upper end to this scale. So
Hoist on my own petard.
no, but it's a match people have to see if you're interested in this era of Ring of Honor. It's an essential viewing for this era. But that's about it.
Yeah, I got nothing to add, man. That's something.
So for plugs, through the years at gmail.com, ThROH, the years at gmail.com, at Trevor Dame on Twitter, at MayorMGF on Twitter. We have a thread on the plug section of the ProWrestlingOnly.com forums. And next time we will be covering, the countdown continues for this was the 5th final show of the year, next 4th final show of the year. How could we possibly follow this up? How about Jushin Freakin' Liger? How about Joe Gagne, annoying me as always? Well, just kidding. I tried to be fake me and I could do it, but how about Jushin Liger, Bryan Danielson, Joe Gagne, the 3 incredible things all together on one show. It's going to happen. That's our next episode Through the Years.
3 great tastes that taste great together.
Until next time, have a good time. Have a great time. Happy birthday, Dr. Keith Lipinski.